Good evening, dandies. Welcome to Undetermined, the podcast.
Okay.
That'll work. So we can refer to each other in our full names whenever we talk to each other.
Yes.
Well, Matt Langston.
Yes.
Well, Gary Lee Connor.
Yeah. Oh,
So there's a good enough introduction.
okay. Yeah, there you go. That's my name. Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. It is November 15th, 2019. Who are we talking to tonight?
It's Gary Lee Connor here, the old guitar player from Screaming Trees and solo ventures nowadays.
Yeah.
Got a
Lots
couple
of
of other projects, it sounds like, these days.
Yeah. Mainly I just call it Gary Lee Connor. When I first started, I was decided I was going to just do a band name, even though it was just me.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a good thing to start on because I've got actually a re-release of my first album coming out. Of my actual solo. Yeah, it was my recent record, Unicorn Curry. That's the one I released last year, and it's been out on vinyl since February. A company in Italy called Vincebus Eruptum Records put it out. I just ran across them on the internet, like on Facebook. They were like, "You want to put my record out?" And I was like, kind of wary at first, like, "Yeah, I guess." And then I didn't, but they put it out. They sent some to the United States so I could sell some too. But they're putting out what is the album called Gary Lee Connor, the Microdot Gnome,
Nice.
which was my first solo album I put out in 2010. And that is coming out in January. You can order it from Italy right now. I'm going to have some in the United States to get on Bandcamp because the shipping from Italy is a little bit. That's what I did. That's what I did with the last record. They actually, it's cool. They pay you in records, so you can sell some of the records and make money right away and not have to worry about
Right. Well, yeah, you can kind of
most of it. Yeah, as most artists, like with indie labels, getting paid is like usually sort of a secondary thing,
right? Getting paid at all, so it kicks back in.
Yeah, but getting records, you can sell them right away. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is.
But
cool.
Anyway, that's coming out. You can look on Facebook for links and stuff to their record company or my Bandcamp page too.
I'm kind of having a Boogie Nights flashback, just Italian vinyl.
Yeah, well, it's imported Italian vinyl. That's what
It's genuine, man, from Italy.
I almost might make it like a collector's thing. I've got one of the Italian copies.
Yeah, right. Well, there's only Italian copies of vinyl now, so there's no American ones.
Right?
But maybe one day I'll have vinyl made in America. I don't know. Right now, that's.
Oh, seriously? So that's how it's going? It's all coming from there?
Yeah, I had a CD put out on Forbidden Place Records, which is a U.S. company. Yeah. They put out the CD of Unicorn Curry. I don't know if they're going to do anything else or not. I'll wait and see. Put out anything else except for I got cassettes too. Like the cassette thing is really big nowadays. I actually ran across this guy from A Solid 7 Records a few years ago, and he put out. On Bandcamp. I have like 3 solo records and then 2 demo albums of demos going all the way back to 1985 up to about 2010 or so. There's like 50 songs on each one, and it's like 4-track demos and like all sorts of different stuff. No, there's no demos of the Screaming Trees, so I didn't want to put like the Pete Townsend. What was that Scoop album where he like weird versions of because the lyrics and stuff are kind of different and probably weren't that great of versions. But I had a whole lot of songs that were never used on anything, So I figured, why not just put it on Bandcamp because it's pretty much free to put it on. I sold quite a few of them, and then the guy from England got me on Facebook and it's like, hey, I'm doing cassettes. Going to do like a double cassette of one of these albums, and this was a few years ago, and he put that out, and he only makes like 30 cassettes or so, so, but he sold all of them, and then he put out the Unicorn Curry on cassette, and he put out the Microdot Gnome thing on cassette too.
Cool.
So I got both those on cassette now. And he's also going to do the second. There's 2 demo albums, and they're both called Under the Weeping Willow Tree, like Volume 1 and 2.
Gotta love that album.
And it's good stuff.
Yeah, and that's coming out on cassette too, like sometime in 2020, probably first part of the year.
Man, I've got to dust off the cassette player. It's come up in several conversations lately.
Yeah,
Cassettes,
I've seen articles about how the cassettes are coming back too. First vinyl came back, and now cassettes. Right. And I've seen even how CDs are coming back. But on the other hand, I saw the vinyl for the first time has outsold CDs this year.
Yeah,
so I think vinyl will be around for quite a while, though.
It's not going to go away. Vinyl, there's just something about it.
Yeah, it's a niche. I'm just so lazy. I don't listen to the vinyl I have. I mean, we have.
Yeah.
I lost most of my records. I got about 50 records left of the old, I probably had 1,500 or 2,000 records at one time. And just because I was all over the country moving, because I met my wife, she lived in New York, and we got married a few years later. And I never moved my record collection when I moved out to New York. I got left in Washington, like at my parents' place, and people started looking through it. And then finally some got flooded, I don't even know, probably some of the records are around somewhere. I don't know where.
Yeah.
But my wife still has all her records. She had about like 2,000 or 3,000 records. I got about
wow.
I went through them and got the half that were good and put them out in the living room. But I never listened to them.
I've got the same sort of thing going on here. My wife has a bunch of records from her. I lost a lot of mine from my childhood, a bunch of 45s. I used to have a shit.
That's what we got that I really would like to look through. I don't know if I ever will. It's like we've got just hundreds and hundreds of 45s of obscure stuff that she lived in New York until like 2000, from like 1988 to 2000. She used to go to shows every night in the city and buy tons of records, like Pier Platters and
that's where you
Jersey,
get them, right?
Yeah. She's like, she's got a PhD in chemistry, and she was a chemistry professor. She still is. That's why we moved to Texas. She got a job here. So we don't go to shows and don't buy vinyl anymore. But that's what she used to always do, was spend all her money on vinyl and go to shows every night. That's how we met.
There are worse lives, man.
Yeah. No, she had a great time. And she had, great memories of seeing all the great bands like back then. It was right at the right time to be going to shows too. 88 to about 95 or so. But she still had all those records and the singles. I mean, there's so many that who knows what they are. We just got boxes and boxes of them. I don't know. I find myself being so lazy about like music though, in vinyl, because like I got all these records. I could listen to them, but you know what I would do if I got the records? I'd probably like look it up on YouTube and listen to it. Because I've never been like an audiophile.
Oh man, I gotta pick up that needle.
I gotta get it out of the thing.
I swear that everything is on YouTube. I've like last year, I have like just had for one, the first I was like, the last 20 years, I got lazy about listening to music. And I was just like, what is there? There's got to be something good. So last year when I really was getting into YouTube, I was mostly listening to 60s stuff. And I was finding stuff I had never heard before, like weird, 60s garage stuff, like making the Pebbles comp look like not obscure, just like really obscure stuff. And this was really great. And then finally about last March, I was like, man, I'm like really lazy. There's either rock is completely dead, or I've just not listened to anything for 20 years, right? So I started checking out stuff, and I've really found a lot of stuff. I mean, there are so many. I think there's like more rock bands than there ever have been before. All sorts of different, stoner rock, there's psychedelic stuff, there's like this hard rock. There's a lot of instrumental. I've never been into instrumental stuff for some reason. I just really need lyrics. But that's like a whole genre of like all sorts of instrumental stuff.
Well, it's crazy. You talk about Forbidden Place. We just had Tony Willis on.
Really? Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago.
Did the CD.
Yeah, we sort of branched out from listening to you and, like, and talked to him. But it's like, man, there are a ton of like really good like stoner like doom acts that are on that label. And like, I'm into like some sort of like, spooky music, I guess you'd call it. We kind of put him on our Halloween episode because, just so many like, stoner doom, like, sort of semi-satanic records anyway.
Yeah, right.
I was like, oh, that's cool. But man, I discovered a bunch of stuff just off of him.
Yeah,
and I think you're right. I think it's all just like I'm not looking hard enough. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's like, I'm getting old. I don't know. I've like listened to everything, but there's still people are making great music out there. I mean, one of the bands I discovered this year was King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard in Australia.
Oh yeah, I've been checking them out. Yep.
Yeah, they just did a U.S. tour, like on their Facebook group. Man, the fans are like crazy. I don't know what age. I mean, some of them are younger. I mean, the band themselves are like probably around 30 or so, late 20s. And I think they've really listened to a lot of old rock. All the way, like krautrock and weird like Captain Beefheart and
right.
I don't know what they probably just listen to everything. It sounds like they've basically taken all of great rock music and kind of just condensed it into like they've done 15 records in the last 10 years.
Wow.
And like one year they did like 5 albums.
Wow.
And all of them are different. Like their latest record, Infest the Rat's Nest, that's like kind of thrash metal. They've done like stuff like jazz. They've done psychedelic stuff. A lot of their stuff's they get kind of pigeonholed in psychedelic because someone said, what kind of band they're? That's how I found them, is because they said they were psychedelic.
Under that tag.
They did the album I started listening to is called Flying Microtonal Banana.
Okay.
And they actually they got some of the guitars like tuned into microtones. And so if you listen to the album, it sounds like it's all through a weird chorus or flanger or something, but it's because of the microtonal thing.
Wow,
kind of like Indian music's like that.
Yeah.
India.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a great band. Another band I listened to, it's been around quite a while that I hadn't heard before, it's OCs or the OCs. It's like the same guy and sort of slightly different. He was called the OCs for a while, and they sounded more garagey. Yeah. And then recently, the last few years, they're kind of getting more like prog, kind of like experimental stuff. And now they're just OCs. They had a really great new record this year too. What was the name of it? What was it? I can't remember the name of the record, but they're really good. And another band that I listened to that's from Australia called the Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. They had a record this year too. A lot of new albums. Like, I try to I kind of been going on the side. If I see something from 2019, I'll be more likely to listen to it because I want to find something that's brand new,
right.
Yeah,
but
I'll listen
I do
to
the same thing.
Older too. Yeah. For a while I was listening to nothing but stuff that was in the last 10 years. But I've been going back and listening to old stuff, a little more now. But just keep finding more and more stuff. There's a couple of YouTube sites or what do you call it, channels that are pretty cool. So Stone is it Stoner or Stone Metal of Doom has a lot of the stoner stuff.
Oh, cool.
There's another one called Captain Beefheart, not Beefheart, but
right?
Beefheart.
That's clever.
Yeah, they got a lot of psychedelic stuff.
Cool.
I'm sure there's some more to discover, but
there's so much. Yeah. There's so much out there right now. It's crazy.
Well, it's almost overwhelming is the thing.
It kind of
is. You go I want to find something to listen to. It's geez, there's so many things. I don't know what to listen to,
I think John and I are contending with that right now because we're always, that's part of what we're doing here is man, we want to, what's good and new and interesting that out there, when we're wanting to reach out to people that, we've been listening to for years that we've kind of have that, sentimental history with, but we're also, keeping our ears open for what's coming up too. Because there's some really good shit out there.
Yeah, I know. Because I kept reading articles like rock is dead. There's nothing else left. And and I'm 57
lazy.
years old, and I'm definitely old enough to say I'm sick of all these kids' music.
Right.
But I don't want to do that because my whole life has been all about rock music, and I don't want to just I still enjoy making stuff that sounds fairly retro, but I try to make it a little, even with the Screaming Trees, didn't really try to. It's just when we did the songs, they didn't sound like they were just recreations of something from the 60s. They had a little bit more to make it sound like they were from 1980s or 90s.
So you think, I think you really embodied that though. And and that's one thing we've talked about before, the moniker of labeling music, and we don't like to do that, but you've got to, you got to kind of have an avenue to go down to find things. But it's the psychedelia, you've definitely got that sound in spades, man. Where did that branch out of you, or where do you think?
I don't know. Well, there's one album that I can think of from the 80s that really influenced me a lot was
well, the 3 o'clock, you've heard of them. They had like 2 or 3 albums,
right.
16 Tambourines and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before 3 o'clock is a record they put out. I didn't quite understand what it was, but originally they were called the Salvation Army, and they had to change their name.
Right.
The Salvation Army didn't like the idea of it. But their first record was put out as Before BFOUR, 3 o'clock. It's like really psychedelic and punk at the same time. It's like mixed together, and that is sort of like the kind of thing I really kind of thought about doing, because that record always, to me, it was like, well, it sounds like it's from now, but on the other hand, would now being like 40 years ago or 35 years ago. But it doesn't sound like I don't know, like, well, for instance, like the Dukes of Stratosphere, something like that, trying to sound just like a band in the 60s.
Right.
There's some bands that do that and some bands that don't.
I do think that's kind of an interesting point, though, because at least for me, I've thought about this, like bands or songs that I listened to 25 years ago still seem kind of fresh a lot of the time. And, when I was a kid, if something was from 25 years ago, it was very obvious that it was from 25 years ago. And I'm wondering, like, if that's a change in music, is that a change in me? Because I don't
know. It's a good question. Probably both.
Probably.
I don't know.
Probably.
I mean,
yeah.
Well, it's like I've told this story before. This was a couple of years back, driving out of town with my wife, and we just tuned into like this quote oldies station, and Alice in Chains comes on. And I'm just like, what the hell is Alice in Chains doing on an oldies station? I was just pissed off and bitching in the car, and my wife's like, dude, that song's 25 years old.
I know.
I don't know, though. I almost consider oldies like a category, though, more than
in the old record stores, you went to the oldie section. It was usually, I remember like in the 80s, it was probably stuff that was in the 60s. But, oldies is now probably anything from the 20th century is definitely.
Yeah.
Oldies,
oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting you talk about like with genre and some things being timeless. It's like, I think like funk, for example. I think the only way I was turned on to old school funk was really by like modern funk bands or like there was like a swing revivalist era, in the 90s where, Squirrel Nut Zippers or things like that were doing. It's like, that's what turned me on. Like Dag, I was listening to them earlier.
The Jane.
Well, Jane, that was the track I was listening to. Yeah. It was just like that really kind of turned me on to funk before, of course I was a kid, I was like, 15 or 16 years old, but then, figuring out later, it's like, oh yeah, and then got into Parliament Funkadelic and,
Yeah, it's interesting nowadays with younger people getting into like, well, I hate to use the term grunge, but that's what people call it, like stuff from the early 90s that was from maybe Seattle or something.
Right.
That's pretty much what grunge is. But, because on Facebook, I see tons of people, there's like, into several groups that are like grunge groups, and, it's just weird the way people talk about them. It's like they're talking about, like historical rock figures.
Right.
But for me, it's people.
They're my contemporaries, right?
Yeah, because like a few years ago, Charles Peterson's his book called Screaming Life with all those photos came out. And I was looking at that, and, like when I was in high school, like it was kind of outcast, didn't feel like I belonged it. But I looked at that book, and it's like, this is like looking at a high school yearbook for me.
Right.
It was like kind of interesting, because it's like all the people like from back then, and nowadays all those people are like legendary figures.
Yeah, right.
Is it like the Who or Jimi Hendrix were back when I was?
And they are that status that's got to feel kind of weird on your end.
It is weird. I mean, it got so weird just in the early 90s when Nirvana got big and stuff. And it was just like, to me it was like an alternate universe suddenly where like pretend like if in the late 60s or early 70s, the Stooges and the MC5 were the biggest bands.
Right.
To me, that's what it was like. I've loved Nirvana. They were like my favorite band at the time before they got big. And it was weird seeing them get big like that. And then, and it really helped our band, the Screaming Trees, a lot too, because we just being from the area, even though we didn't really have a lot musically in common with the other bands, it boosted us. We were lucky enough to get on that single soundtrack. Last on that thing.
That's a great soundtrack, by the way.
Yeah, it really is. The movie's kind of like, the soundtrack's awesome. It's
weird... Don't tell that to Matt's wife. She gets really pissed off. She loves that movie.
Okay, all right. Yeah,
I tell her the same thing.
I love the soundtrack.
She loves the soundtrack. She does. I tell her the same thing. The soundtrack's better than the movie. But
yeah, I mean, yeah, it was kind of cheesy, but
yeah, some parts of it I didn't care for. But so you grew up, okay? So Ellensburg, Washington, right?
Yeah.
It's like smack in the middle of the state, right?
Yeah, way over the mountains, 100 miles away from Seattle. Okay. Like pretty much really isolated, you know. It's like, I don't know if it's as isolated nowadays, but it was just like, you know, Seattle was a different world. I didn't even go to Seattle. Well, like I moved to Ellensburg when I was 6 years old. I was born in California. Then we moved there, and the rest of our family was all born in Ellensburg, except for Van. He was like 1 year old. Oh, okay. I was like 6 years old in 1968.
All right.
We moved to Ellensburg, and I didn't even go to Seattle until I was like in fifth grade, like a trip. And then I hardly ever went to Seattle until I was older and could drive.
So was Seattle like the city for you?
Yeah, yeah, it definitely was. Although the city that was closer, Yakima, which is like about 50,000 people, and Ellensburg was like 10,000. That's where we used to shop and stuff. That was only half an hour away. But the basic problem with Seattle and Ellensburg is you got to go over Snoqualmie Pass, and like half the year you might. Some nice snow, weather isn't the greatest. So in summer, it's fine. I mean, after, I don't know, by the early 80s, the road had been really like, you know, the really nice freeway over the pass, but still you run into a bunch of snow. Yeah. It's not fun.
Before that, you couldn't just like pop over to go shopping or something. It had to be like a trip.
Not really. I mean, in the summer, it was all right to do that. We never really did it though.
Yeah.
I went to shows later in the 80s. I drive over either myself or somebody else and go to shows. I mean, I started going to a few like big rock shows before, like I went to like Rush. The first concert I went to was Yes in the Round in 1979. That was like because I was really into Yes in high school. I was like a prog snob. Like before I got into like punk and new wave and stuff, I was like I first started listening to like the Beatles and like 60s rock and the Doors and stuff like that. And then when I was about a sophomore in high school, like I started listening, I got really, really into Yes and King Crimson and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, everything else sucks. I only like art.
Right.
But by the early 80s, I like started listening to, XTC because they were kind of slightly, they were like musically more complex than a lot of bands, and that kind of led me into punk and new wave, and that was like sort of a liberation to realize like, well, I don't like this like art, I like all sorts of rock music, and I got back into a lot of mid 60s stuff, and I discovered like a lot of the garage rock comps, like the Pebbles compilation and the English Rubble, Freak Beat thing, and by the time I started the band, that was like mostly what I was getting into, was like mid 60s psychedelic stuff. Yeah.
So your folks owned a video store, right?
Yeah, we started it all together. It was the band started in 85. The video store started in 84, like a year before that. Okay. My dad decided that he was going to he was a school principal. He was going to quit being a school principal and use his retirement money, which probably was really dumb monetarily, but it worked out just like sort of serendipitously for the band. Because what happened was we started the video store. It was in this place downtown, and the back room was this huge empty back room, like concrete floor. It must have been about 50 feet by 40 feet. It was huge. And that's where the band ended up rehearsing and stuff.
Nice.
So it was like our headquarters, basically, while we all lived in Ellensburg. So my dad got his retirement. We started the video store because that was like a big thing at the time. There was one other video store in Ellensburg.
So it wasn't like he was like a big fan of film. He just like thought it was like
we thought it would be a good. No, it was fun though because we got to get all these movies that because back then you didn't have.
They were booming there for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was it started out doing pretty well, but it was open for about 10 years. We all ended up moving over to Seattle by the early 90s, and then it was still going, but it kind of, so the video store started, and we all ended up, like, by the time the band started in summer 85, we had other bands, like Van and me and Mark Pickerel were in, like, cover bands.
Oh, okay.
Like, we had two bands, one called Him and Those Guys,
and the other called The Explosive Generation. And we play like this. I think we started the first one about 82. So this lasted like 3 years or so. We had these bands. And we played punk covers, new wave covers, like 60s stuff, and like MTV hair metal stuff, like just basically everything.
What's the first song you can remember that you guys tracked out or tried to cover?
Oh, let's see. Well, we did stuff. Let's see. We did some XTC stuff. We did like Black Flag stuff.
Nice.
You know, some mixed stuff. We did like Def Leppard songs, Black Sabbath songs. Like Flock of Seagulls. I mean, you name it. It was like, you know, a completely like everything. Yeah. Because the idea was we were going to play dances and stuff. You know, that's the only.
That's what they want.
Yeah, because being from Ellensburg, we had no concept of a music scene. We didn't know that, you know, you could do original songs and play clubs, and there was a little bit of that going on in Seattle at the time. But you know, this was like early, like Green River was probably just in their infancy. I think the only bands I remember hearing from Seattle were like the U-Men. You know, I knew there were a few bands in Seattle, but I didn't really know anything about a music scene or anything. And there wasn't too much of one at the time. You know, it was
there was what
just
like
starting.
Queensryche maybe was
Queensryche. Well, there were some bands like the Blackouts. Was it Fastbacks or any? But the Throwing Up. Some of those bands were like a little before my time. I didn't really know much about them.
And Heart, everybody knows that.
So we did not know anything about this except for maybe, you know, names of a few bands had a record or two. So you know, our idea was like start this cover band and play dances. And we like, my dad like loaned us some money and we got a PA and stuff, and we didn't play much. We played like maybe 2 or 3 dances, just like I guess when we rent the auditorium of the junior high or something, we played it wasn't a dance, we just played like all our songs. And a few people showed up.
Get together.
I don't know. It was kind of so I don't know. So what happened was about summer 85, Van and Mark Pickerel had met Mark Lanigan, our singer, at like he was like a big, at the time Mark was like really in, like he was like a juvenile, well he wasn't juvenile, he was like 21. And Van and Mark Pickerel were a little bit younger. They were still in high school, and he met him at like parties, you know, like drinking parties, you know, keggers, stuff like that. So, and they, you know, figured out that they had music in common. Like they liked a lot of new wave and punk and weird rock stuff. And it turned out that Lanigan had a lot of records that we had. The first time I met Lanigan was we like Van like told Mark about my record collection, and we like I went over to his house and I borrowed some of his records, and he came over and borrowed some of mine. And that was like a few months before we started the band. And then the band started because Screaming Trees, because Van and Mark Pickerel, they were like sick of me because they thought I was like, you know, too like, I don't know what I was like, trying to control, you know, the band too much or something. I don't know. We weren't even doing original songs really yet. I think we had 1 or 2 songs we might have done. But anyway, they decided to start a band with Lanigan singing, and Van was playing guitar, and Mark Pickerel was playing drums. And the only place they had to practice was our house. This was before we had the video store going. Or I guess we had the video store going. We just were still practicing at my house in my room. And that's where the other band practiced. And we had everything set up there. So they came over and, but they didn't have a bass player. So apparently, if I remember right, my mom was like, you have to let Lee play bass. You know, I was 20, 21 or something, 22, something like that.
My mom said,
like, yeah, you have to let him. So that's how I got in the scrimmage.
Mom made him. Nice, have to play nice.
Right.
That's awesome.
So we were just playing. Van had been in a punk rock band that did covers of punk rock stuff called MDL. What did that stand for? Like Millions of Dead Lenins, like Vladimir Lenin. I don't know. They were an Ellensburg band.
Okay.
And Van knew all these Black Flag covers, like stuff from My War, Slippin' In and stuff, and probably a little earlier stuff too. And so we were playing that, some Black Flag covers, and I think we played like maybe like Cream or Hendrix covers, like tried to do Purple Haze or something like that. And that lasted maybe a few weeks, maybe a month or two. They came over and we played a little bit. And then, about a year before, I got a cassette 4-track, and I'd started writing songs on it.
started before, like, I'd always wanted to write songs, but I was like really into writing poetry for several years. I would just write.
I tried that too.
You know, like I had like hundreds of them. Yeah, I was really into it. You know, I made like little books and stuff. If I would have had the internet at the time, I probably would have put stuff on the internet, but it wasn't around then. So, Mark like found out I had been writing songs, and I played some of them for him. He's like, "Man, these are all right. So maybe we should do this instead of the other stuff." So that sparked the idea of doing original songs. And let's see, what do we do? I guess I sat down and got Mark to sing some of my demos. Like, I can't remember if we actually played them with the whole band or not, but we might have. I can't remember. But we made a demo of these, which is basically all the songs from Other Worlds. And we wrote one or two songs together, like Pictures in My Mind. That's on Other Worlds. Mark and I wrote that together.
So that's where like Steve Fisk comes in, and around that time.
Yeah. See, this was like probably by the time of the fall of 85.
Okay.
And Mark Pickerel worked in Ace Records, the record store. Steve Fisk had come in there before. And we used to see him around town. Like at the time, he had this like eraser head looking hair and glasses. He was really weird looking for Ellensburg, you know? I mean, we looked a little weird sometimes, you know?
Right.
But it was like, who is this guy? So and he had a single at Ace Records. And so we were like, man, the guy's like a famous guy. He's got a single.
Right.
You know? And we found out that he was working at the studio. I don't know what they originally called it. We ended up calling it Velvetone Studios because I don't know if they ever actually really called it. I don't know. That was the name of the record company, but that's what I always called it, Velvetone. Because anyway, we found out he was working down there with his friend Sam Albright, who owned the studio. He'd come to Ellensburg, and they were recording a few things. They had this records label. They put out a couple, like an album called the Twang Babies. I can't remember what that was even like, but it wasn't some weird local thing. I don't even know what it was, but it was not the greatest thing in the world.
But it was a record.
I don't ever listen to it. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, right. It was a record, and we're like, man, you know. And at the time, I remember the idea that I got that we could do our own record was I read an article in Spin Magazine by the guy Giza X. Yeah. It was like, don't sit around and wait for a record label. Do it yourself. It was like DIY, you know. You can probably find. I think I looked that article up on the internet recently. I found it. So that was like kind of that article inspired us, or me at least, to think we should go and record our own stuff and try to put it out. After we talked to Steve, we like booked some 3 days at the studio, and we practiced. I guess we practiced. We never practiced songs very much for in the studio. A lot of times we just give Mark Pickerel a tape of the demo and say, figure this out and we'll go record.
Kind of how like we do this. So
yeah, we were really lazy when it came to rehearsing and stuff. We did sometimes, but we booked the time and went in for 3 days and met Steve, and you know, he was really cool. He played keyboards and stuff too. The earlier stuff, he played keyboards. I played keyboards on some of the stuff later on, but even though I'm not really much of a keyboard player, I had to punch in every 2 seconds. You know? Right. Yeah, but Steve played a lot of the early stuff on the first, second records he played. He's a really great keyboard player.
Like pitching that stuff is it's like really cool.
Right. So we did the demo, and they were like, you know, this is pretty cool. Maybe you should be on a record label. You know. They didn't really pay for anything. We had to figure out how. We ended up. We had the video store. We like did some like trading of like equipment and stuff because we were selling. We were selling like, you know, VCRs and stuff like that. We like had traded them a couple high end VCRs.
There you go.
Hey, whatever
for some studio time. Yeah. So anyway, we got the demo done, and we decided. I guess at the time that was like we figured out we could do a cassette. Because I know we'd read about, like, you know, at the time it was like the cassette revolution. It's like bands, instead of waiting and doing vinyl or getting a record label, they were just putting out cassettes. It was like a really big deal in the mid 80s there.
Just get a dual cassette player and
yeah, right. I mean, we had some duped somewhere. I don't know where we got them duped, and got some covers made and put out the Other Worlds cassette. And I think, you know, Steve helped us some, made a bunch of them, and then we found out about Calvin Johnson. And K cassettes. What was really weird is I realized that Calvin Johnson had lived in Ellensburg when he was in junior high, and I remember him from this little twerp kid. Like, I think he's in the same grade as me, And it's like, that's Calvin Johnson. That's the same guy. It was like in junior high. He's like, yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah.
But now he's like a weird freak and beat happening.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, oh yeah, he was an awesome guy. It's like he's still around doing stuff. But
so how did Greg Ginn get involved in?
Great. Well, that's a little bit later.
Okay.
Because anyway, we make it not too long.
Mm-hmm.
We got the cassettes out. Calvin distributed some of them, and we decided, like the Velvetone guys, Steve and Sam, decided that they want to do the record with us. So we went and we were writing songs at the time. Got a bunch of songs together over probably 2 or 3 months recording the Clairvoyance record and getting it pressed on vinyl. We went to Los Angeles and got it. We actually went to what's the name of the place? John Golden. What's the name of the mastering place? Everything was mastered there in the 80s. I can't remember. It's a pretty famous place, but we went there and watched them master the record, which was wild. On the metal.
Oh, okay.
When they actually cut it into the metal,
like the original.
That was the only time I ever did that. But there was this was in the summer of 1986. So we put out the Clairvoyance record. Steve knew people around, college radio stuff. We sent a lot of it out to college radio. Got some in stores. I don't know. We pressed 1,000 of them at first, and we repressed another 1,000. It did all right. I mean, I think it was selling. We did a small tour of the West Coast. It went to Los Angeles, and this is sort of where the SST thing got going. Was Steve knew Ray Farrell, who later worked at DGC and did a lot of stuff with Sonic Youth and Nirvana and stuff. But at the time, he worked at SST, and Steve had known him from back whenever he lived. I guess he must have lived in LA at one time. He came to see us. We played 1 or 2 shows in Los Angeles, and I guess Ray Farrell got a tape or album or whatever to Greg Ginn, and after Clairvoyance had been out for a little while, and early '87, we were we actually got a call from Restless Records, like Pink Dust Records.
Oh, okay.
They were kind of interested in signing us. That happened before we got the call from Greg Ginn.
Okay.
We actually did get a call from Greg Ginn, which was pretty wild. And we'll tell you about that in a sec.
I want to hear about
that.
And
I apologize for calling him Greg Ginn, but this is just a problem. Like in the Midwest, we don't hear people's names pronounced. We
spend so much time. We read about them.
And it can be, I can be a Black Flag fan 20 years later and still not know how to pronounce, if they haven't been.
That's okay. I've found the same thing out about people before. So,
all right. Sorry.
Yeah. So after we did this tour and got the call from Pink Dust, we were like, well, maybe we should go with them. I don't know. We know, there's some interesting stuff on that label. But one day at the video store, all of a sudden we got a call from Greg Ginn. It's and we were really into SST stuff, it was wow, that's one of our basically dream label. It's what would be the best label you could possibly imagine being on? Would be SST. So it called and talked to Mark Lanigan, and we're sitting there. Greg Ginn's talking to Mark Lanigan. Okay. And he's going, blah, 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 blah. I really like this. And he's not saying exactly I want to sign you. And finally Lanigan's well, what? You want us to be on SST? He's yeah, sure. And we're whoa, that was probably the coolest thing that ever happened in my whole life. That was the most awesome. It was way better than Epic was kind of interesting.
Well, he started that thing when he was just a kid.
Yeah, I know.
11, 12 years old or something like that. And yeah.
Was it really that?
I think it was. He was selling. He wasn't selling stereo equipment or something like that.
I think it had something to do with that was the company SST was had some, I don't know what it was, some kind of electronic equipment.
Yeah,
that was where the name came from. But he really liked Other Worlds. That's what he really liked a lot. I was okay, well, that was we kind of moved on from that point. We were coming up with some new songs, and we'd already been working on another record in the studio at Velvetone, which ended up being Even If and Especially When.
Oh, okay.
The first SST album. But after we got the call, we're okay, well, we'll be on SST Records. So that was pretty wild.
Okay.
So, I mean, that was just it was total dream come true. Even nowadays, I think, man, that was just the most, even though SST had its, all independent records has problems.
Yeah.
That's still,
Yeah.
still is the coolest thing ever, because there's just like so many cool bands on SST. And that was like right when they were doing the expansion of like signing all sorts of bands,
Yeah, you can put it on your.
That's probably the problem with a lot of indie records. Indie record companies, they just get too big and too ambitious.
But
they really had amazing stuff.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, yeah, it's part of history, really, to be part of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I look back on it, and it's like, just like, because that's when we started. It's like, we want to be a band, a real band, like the kind of band I would listen to, maybe not famous, but just something that like listen to old stuff. And it's like, wow, that band was really cool. Not very many people heard of them, but it ended up a lot more people heard of us than I ever thought would. Right. So, it's like, okay, that's cool too. Yeah. But,
did that ever become like normal at any point, like just that I'm going to be recognized?
I guess I even get we live in a tiny, well, it's not tiny, it's about 100,000 people, but it's so isolated in the middle of Texas, in San Angelo, Texas. That's where I live now, and I've had people recognize me in San Angelo, right. Which that's really weird. Because like one time I ordered pizza from Domino's a few years ago, and they saw my name, and I came in, went to get it. They're like, "Hey, aren't you really kind of Screaming Trees?" I was like, yeah. I had people recognize me in Walmart.
Really?
Not a whole lot, but
enough.
Even any at all.
Yeah.
So in Seattle, I used to get recognized all the time. It was like, especially after The Lost You came out and stuff. So I don't know. I guess to get used to it after a while. It's still surreal. The whole thing that happened with grunge.
Yeah.
Even though I never figure out why we were grunge.
I don't know necessarily that you guys really fit that moniker, but you were from that area. Like I said, I always found it kind of like
from the area. It's close enough. Right. This will sell.
Yeah. Exactly.
When Chris Cornell's like doing your album, and you're on Epic, and it's kind of going to be hard to avoid.
I know. We always used to joke about grunge, especially like a little later, like in the mid-90s, when they had like grunge fashion came out, and that thing that the big prank that Megan Jasper from Sub Pop played on, it was New York Times when she like gave him like the grunge terms. That thing that was really funny. So
the model fashion shoot.
Among the band, I don't think anyone was mad about the label grunge. I think it was more like a joke. It was like, that was like, we're grunge or whatever. So
it did seem like there was kind of a scramble to kind of lump every band that was halfway through, was like in that
there was
area.
Like every fucking record company had about 10 people scouting Seattle for the next big thing,
right?
Like
were there ever bands that you saw getting signed that you were like, those guys?
I don't know. I don't know who didn't get signed.
Right? I could come up with probably 10 bands if I sat and thought about it.
There were some great bands that got signed and then just like got lost, like Love Battery, for instance. I can't remember what label they got signed to, but it was just like they sold like a few thousand records and that was it. Or the Fluid, that's another one. They were one of the great, even though they weren't from Seattle, they played in Seattle all the time. They came over they were almost like a Seattle band because they were from Denver, but they came to Seattle and played all the time. I saw them several. They were one of the most amazing live bands I ever saw. That was another one. They got signed to Hollywood Records, which was an interesting label because our A&R guy from Epic, after he moved on from Epic, he was the president of Hollywood Records, the Disney label. And the Fluid got signed to that label, and they just like got nothing. It was like nobody ever heard of them again after their record. So that's like two bands that just got completely. They probably would have been better if they would have stayed on an indie. So that happened to a lot of bands. I don't know.
Well, I was going to say we talked to Rich and Eric from Truck Stop Love a couple weeks ago. They're like a Manhattan, Kansas band, but they kind of had that that sound, kind of a punk garage sound.
Yeah.
And it's like that had a ripple effect. All the way through America, where like, it's like the one would be signed in Kansas that sounded, a certain way, and it's like, who else sounds like this around here?
Yeah,
and Rich was like, yeah, that was happening a lot.
I know.
It's like that was going around everywhere, and it's just I've always wondered about like the poor guy who's like, a fucking stellar like jazz musician who lives in Seattle.
Yeah, right.
There exactly. Or plays bop or something. And he's like, God damn it.
I know. Forever, and look at all these.
Throw on some chords and call yourself a grunge pianist.
Right?
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, there were a few, like, Stone Temple Pilots, for instance. I think we actually played with them when they were Mighty Joe Young. I remember we were in Louisiana. It was before they got big. And I don't remember. I wasn't watching or anything, but I'm not 100% sure it was them, but I think we did. Anyway, that's like a pretty good example of like, the copycat band, even though they ended up being a lot better than I imagined when they started out. They had like a Nirvana sounding song or Pearl Jam sounding song, their first record.
Oh yeah.
But I'm sure they were just doing what they wanted to do.
Probably. But they did sound a lot like grunge. If you like
they did.
At least their first record. Now some of the other stuff like that Interstate Love Song, that was interesting. That was like totally different. It seemed like in their second record, they did more like what they
took some more chances.
Yeah, the first thing definitely just like the Pearl Jam sounding song, the Nirvana song.
Yeah.
Whatever. And they, I always kind of like equate that. Think of like old bands from the 60s, like for instance, like the Nas, like Todd Rundgren's group.
Right.
They were pretty much copycats, but they're one of my favorite old bands, So, or the Monkees, for instance, The Monkees are another
Monkees, totally
so,
manufactured.
20 years later, you look at they're 25 or however long it's been, too long. Things seem a little different.
Doesn't mean Last Train to Clarksville's not a bad, not a good song.
Yeah, right. I mean, I really liked a lot of the Monkees stuff. They had some great songs, they were kind of manufactured. And I mean, the Stone Temple Pilots I'm sure they manufactured themselves.
Right.
Like the Monkees, at least at first, were like, that's a total...
right,
like today,
the first boy band,
like Jack Johnson today.
Oh, yeah, right.
I'm
kind of there's a formula there that I get tired of hearing.
Yeah.
Hey, you might want to be on the show one day.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jack. No disrespect.
So as far as grunge goes, I was just sort of like, I don't really care one way or the other. It's like, it was a joke at the time, and now it's just like a genre of music that sometimes we end up getting fit into, and whatever. I don't really worry about saying the word grunge.
Right.
So
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't even know what it is. I mean, I know that to me, growing up we're from the Midwest and from Missouri, Illinois, that area. I mean, when I heard some of those bands, I knew it was different than anything I'd ever heard. Yeah. Not entirely different from a lot of things. I mean, I grew up close to Chicago, so we had like Big Black, and we had, Wax Trax Records and stuff was putting out some crazy shit, and I knew that it was definitely different. We had punk rock, of course, before that, and that's just, to me, that's kind of what it was. It was just punk rock, and I was just like, oh, thank God, at least MTV is picking up some punk rock bands. So I don't know, like grunge had to do more with just, I guess, where they were from. I mean, we still think that kind of this day. I think in the Midwest that it's just Seattle bands.
Well, the thing is, that's sort of what grunge was. But the whole thing started really as a sort of like post-punk rock movement. The early 80s bands, like Black Flag and a lot of the hardcore stuff. At least as far as the American stuff goes, and a lot of those indie labels and the bands moved on to do more complex. Some of them Husker Du, pop stuff. Some of them more avant-garde stuff. It was the 80s were an amazing time for indie labels and indie bands because there was just so many great things going on that no one except maybe college radio was listening to. And it's sort of what happened was it just kept going on and on and on. And eventually major labels got wind of a few things. That was when the whole thing getting signed to Epic started. We're on SST. We've done 3 or 4 records, and we're kind of like, well, what are we going to do now? We've done this. We're touring a couple of times a year. We're not making any money or anything, but we were all working at the video store. Everyone worked at the video store in the band, so we could go off and go on tour and come back. So we didn't have to worry about getting another job. So some of the bands on SST started getting signed to major labels, like the Meat Puppets and Soundgarden got signed. Of course, they had an album on SST too. That Mark Pickerel was sort of instrumental in that happening. Actually, I guess.
Oh yeah,
yeah. He talked to Greg Ginn about Soundgarden. It's like, you should really check these guys out. And they were, they were like, hey man, they'd done the Screaming Life album.
Oh, and I love that one.
Mark Pickerel was like, well, I'll talk to Greg Ginn about it. And
FOP. Yep.
FOP. Yeah. So these bands were getting signed, and we were like, well, maybe we should try to do that. So first we were like, well, we need to get a manager. And since Mark Pickerel knew Soundgarden, he found out Susan Silver, who was their manager.
Yeah, Chris Cornell's wife.
Yeah, right. Yeah, his first one, I guess. They got divorced at that point, I guess. She's still around, I guess. I don't know. I haven't heard from her for years. But anyway, so we got her to be the manager, and she started looking around, and we had some people come to shows, like from different labels. And eventually, I guess this was in, early 1990, we got some interest from, I don't know anybody besides that, but mainly Epic. And we met up with Bob Pfeiffer, who was actually in a band in Cleveland in the early 80s called Human Switchboard. I don't know if you heard of them or not. They were kind of interesting band.
I haven't heard of them.
Kind of new wavy post-punk type of thing. Yeah, they weren't real famous or anything, but, it was like, okay. So he kind of knew. He was an interesting guy, kind of crazy, but cool too. He helped us a lot, He was like definitely mostly on our side about stuff, which is a good thing to have when you have an AR guy, because they label, you never know what the hell they're going to pull on you. So when it comes to major labels. Anyway, Nacho, no. My cat is chewing on my cord of my microphone. That's not a good idea.
The new cords taste best.
Yeah, no kidding.
I do.
So, we were like, okay, we're going to get signed to Epic Records. And that was, I don't know. I mean, it was just like, okay, we're going to do this. And it wasn't near as exciting as I did SST, because it wasn't like, oh, they're giving you $1 million or anything. I remember we got signed a publishing deal and got a $10,000 advance. We thought, that's a lot of money. Like, we had to split it up. We hardly got any money at all, really. $10,000 sounded like a lot of money at the time. And we sold basically.
I'll be okay for a couple
Yeah, we should have
never
done that, because we basically sold half of our publishing rights forever. So, I make half as much money as I would otherwise. That's pretty much, at least from the Epic stuff, the only, money we still make is a little bit from mechanical royalties for the publishing stuff.
Okay, yeah.
So that was early 90, and then by the time we were having all sorts of problems, Mark Pickerel was like wanting to quit the band, and we actually had a different drummer. We went to Europe in 1990. Sean Hollister, who was in the band King Crab in Ellensburg, he was our drummer for a while, for about a year. He went to Europe with us, but then Pickerel, he recorded the Uncle Anesthesia record with us in the summer of 1990, but that was all he was going to do, was record the record. I never quite understood exactly. I read somewhere, like an interview with him,
like a temp
that he was like really he wanted to write songs and stuff like that. And he talked to Lanigan about it, and Lanigan was like, I don't know. I never really knew that, because later on, he did all sorts of albums and stuff. He sings and plays guitar and stuff. But at the time, I did not even have an inkling of that, because I was like the main songwriter, and Lanigan was, doing his solo record.
Might have been some tunnel vision there, just like, I can't deal with that.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
We got to get this out.
Yeah, right.
Let's get this
So we did that record.
Right.
And did a tour before it came out, again with Sean Hollister. And that was a weird time for the band, because we had Hollister, but then Van, like in late 1990, after we finished that, it was a tour with Social Distortion, because they were on Epic, so it was like co-label. It was like 2 or 3 month tour,
label show,
the fall of 1990, and with Sean Hollister playing drums. And then we came back, but Van, like, this was when Lou Barlow had either kicked out or left Dinosaur Jr. I don't know which, but
okay, yeah. So this is when
Jay was looking for a new bass player, and Van went and played with Dinosaur Jr. for couple months. He went on some tour with him, and Mark and I were like, well, geez, we've got this record coming out. Are we going to just not do anything? Or are we going to? So we decided. Well, Van had left the band a few years before, in 1988, and we had Donna Dresch, who was in this band Danger Mouse. She played bass with us for one tour in the fall of 1988. So we're going to ask her. We asked her to come back, And she had a friend, another woman who was going to play drums. I don't know her name. I can't remember. She was in some band in Washington, D.C. That was the plan, is to get them to play and go on tour for the Uncle Anesthesia album in the early 1991. I was like, okay, I'm really, it'd be nice if Van came back and was in the band.
Yeah, couldn't you just had like your mom tell him?
Yeah, right, exactly. Right. So I had the idea. It's like, I guess this was, I don't know, Bud Honey wasn't doing much at the time, but I asked Dan Peters. I guess I wasn't living in Seattle. I can't remember if I called him or what, but I talked to him. It's like, you want to play drums with us, And he was like, yeah, that'd be interesting. Mm-hmm. Van comes back, he'll play drums with us. So I called Van. It's like, if you come back, Dan Peters will play drums with us. And he was like, I don't know if things weren't going well with Dinosaur Jr. or what, but he was like, okay, I'll do it. So that's how Dan Peters got in the band. We practiced a little bit, probably not too much. We never practiced very much. And went on tour for Uncle Anesthesia in spring of 91, which didn't last too long. It was, that was like, I don't know, the history of Lanigan and the band. Like, he was like, I was talking earlier about him, like meeting the Van and Mark Pickler, like at like parties, when everyone's drunk. And, he had quite the like high school and early, late teens and early 20s career of like, he got arrested for stealing stuff, and he was like dealing drugs and all sorts of, wasn't the best influence on people probably. But anyway, right about the time we started the band, was probably part of the reason he started the band, was he was working in the pea fields, like I don't know if he was driving a combine or driving a truck or something. He got run over by a truck or a combine or something. By his legs, and he smashed his legs up horribly. Wow. They didn't get broken, God. But they were totally bruised. Mm-hmm. And he got freaked out, and he stopped drinking, stopped doing drugs, went totally fucking sober. This is right at the time we started the band in 1985. Okay. And so that was I think part of the reason, he really got into the band was something to keep his mind off of, drinking and drugs and stuff. Mm-hmm. But he spent, as far as I know, and he might have relapsed. I don't think he did. I don't know. But until about 1991, he was like totally sober, as far as I know. It didn't seem like he wasn't. So, but then like when we went to Europe in 1990, there was a lot of, pot around, especially like, Holland, people giving us pot and stuff. He started smoking pot again.
Well, I'm surprised even going straight over it being that young anyway, when something like that, it's usually kind of the opposite. It's like,
I know coin. It's weird that happened, but it did. Yeah. So, but right at the beginning of that Uncle Anesthesia tour, we just got a new van, and we had two vehicles. We rented a minivan, and most of us were renting that. Mark and the two road guys had the new van with all the equipment, and we were going through Wyoming after a show or two, and it was like black ice, and the van wiped out. The equipment van wiped out and rolled over, landed up on the other side of the road. Nobody was badly hurt, but it got totally spent 2 or 3 days in, what town was it? Rawlins, Wyoming, trying to figure out what to do. And we ended up renting another truck. Amazing, we kept going. I mean, that was just like, I couldn't believe we kept going. But I canceled a show or two. We ended up in Chicago in a hotel for a few days, regrouping, and then we had a show in Chicago. But that was like during that time he started drinking again, and that was just like, that was like the beginning of the end of his sobriety. I never like to say anything negative about Mark, right. I mean, totally, because we always supported each other for years, even though we had lots of animosity about different things and stuff like that. We'd always we had each other's backs. It was like, if do something bad to somebody else, stick up for them.
And you feel bad with that. Yeah, but nomenclature too. It's just like saying drinking for some people. I went on drinking, and none of the people was like they were drinking.
Yeah, well, this was bad because it's led to this was the kind of thing. And Dan Peters, he was into drinking at the time. He wasn't arguing about it, and so was Van. I was the only one that didn't drink much. I never was too much into drinking or drugs or anything. I was just kind of at least as far as substance abuse goes, the only person who wasn't completely out of it. Everybody else had their problems. So that led to about a month of just crazy crap and shit going on with him drinking. And, they get up in the first thing in the morning, be drinking in the
van, which was fun. I didn't, but
yeah.
So
yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, so this was before he got into really doing, heroin and stuff. And he might have been doing that some on and off here and there, but we wasn't like having problems because of it. But the drinking thing, we ended up having to cancel the last few shows of the tour, and everyone flew home and stuff this was in the summer of 91, and we're kind of like, and I don't remember this, but I read a review recently with Lanigan saying that he was going to quit the band or something at that time, and I don't remember anything about that. But that's what he said. Maybe he never told me about it, which wouldn't be surprised because he didn't tell me we were.
Yeah, it might have been.
He didn't tell me that we were going to break up at the end of that last show.
Yeah, right.
But it wasn't surprising because everything was just kind of petering out.
He wasn't happy.
No. So summer of 1991, and yeah, we're like, okay, maybe we can do another record with Epic. They seem to be interested in it. Our Uncle Anesthesia had done all right. It sold something like 50,000 copies, which for a first. Fairly unknown, like in major label land, band was not too bad at all. So they were like, okay, we can do another record. And this was before, this was like when grunge was underground. It was still like, Nirvana was on Sub Pop, Bunny was Sub Pop. They were really big in England on the Enemy. It's like a big deal on college radio, but it wasn't like mainstream yet. And Nirvana was probably working on Nevermind at the time. So we're like, okay, what are we going to do? So I guess Mark decided not to quit because we decided that we'd ask Dan Peters, you either keep playing with us or go back to Mudhoney. We totally understand if you want to go back to Mudhoney because that's your band. And, he wanted to, Mudhoney was going to do some more stuff. So, so he's like, okay. So we need a new drummer. And usually we just anybody we came across, we just used them. And, it wasn't like we auditioned a whole bunch of people. It was kind of like, whatever is going to happen. That's kind of the way the whole band always was. It's like, whatever's going to happen.
You find a beast like Barrett Martin.
Yeah. So we came across Barrett Martin. And it was kind of serendipitous really at the time because we had a few new songs, including Shadow of the Season, which Mark and I had written together. This was like a weird time too, because over the years, like on the SST records, the Clairvoyance, we wrote a lot of stuff together. And then it kind of like ended up being, because I was so into like doing psychedelic stuff. My stuff was just like way more psychedelic than it even ended up on the records. Or stupid sometimes, just like really dumb lyrics. And Mark would take the song, I gave him a demo usually. And every once in a while we get together and write something together by that point in the middle of the SST years. But mostly what happened was I give him demos and he's like, oh, this is pretty cool. And he'd like come in the studio and maybe he'd change the title, maybe he'd change some of the lyrics. It could be he changed all the lyrics or he'd change none of them. Like for instance, like the song Pathway. That's one of the few songs he like wrote all the lyrics for and changed it from some dumb thing that was completely different. I had it. Right. Or another one, actually, there's a couple songs though, like on Invisible Lantern, Gray Diamond Desert. That was when we actually sat down and wrote together, and he wrote the lyrics and I wrote the music. So, it depends. But mostly, like I said, it was like I'd write anywhere between, maybe he'd write half the lyrics, maybe he'd write 25%. It's just you can't tell. I can't even remember a lot of it. But
so I'm wondering, does some of the psychedelia come from just the poetry background, do you think?
Well, that's how I learned to write songs was by writing poems. I was like, I can actually write lyrics now because I've written all these poems for years.
Right. Well, and poetry can be kind of flowery and well,
that's the thing. My lyrics always have just been more descriptive of states of mind or things. Right. The colors are pretty butterflies or whatever, Right. And I just try to come up, nowadays I try to come up with titles. If I can come up with a cool title, I can usually get the lyrics pretty quick. Yeah. So but definitely, I was so into psychedelic stuff that I just and
well, I mean, if you're not into actually eating microdots or
no. Yeah, I did acid. Somewhere. The weird thing is, people probably think I'm on acid all the time.
Right.
I did acid one time in 1986. We were down in California in Santa Cruz, the last show of before we got signed to SST, the short California tour we did. And I ran into some guy after the show, and he's like, "Hey man, I really like your record. Or I really like the show. If you send me your record, I'll send you some acid." I was like, "Okay." And I thought, okay, whatever. So I don't think I ever sent the guy the record. I can't remember if I did or not. He said, I got a weird letter in the mail with 5 fucking tabs
And I'm like, okay. So one night in like probably December of 1986, I was like, I'll try one of them. So I took it. And, an hour later, I'm like, I don't feel anything. So I took another one.
Oh, no.
Finally, I took all of them.
Oh, no.
And 3 or 4 hours later, it's just like, whoa, this was like fucking like 24-hour trip.
Oh, no.
And it was like, a mix of good and bad. I think the bad was enough to make me not want to ever do it again. But the good was like really did inspire 2 or 3 records worth of
that's good.
songs, I mean, right after that, I wrote like Transfiguration, Don't Look Down, Other Days, No Different Planets, and Ivy. Ivy was weird because like I remember I wrote it, and it was like this poster, San Francisco poster I bought down at Haight Ashbury or down there in the 80s. They still had posters from the 60s for sale of this like weird woman, it's like green and orange. I got it on my wall right now. I'm looking at it. And when I was on acid, like my room was totally psychedelic looking anyway, but like I remember the whole wall melting of the poster, and I was inspired by that later. And I wrote Ivy, and I didn't play it for Lanigan. It was the only song I didn't play for Lanigan because I was somehow embarrassed by it. I don't know why, but I didn't play it to way after we'd finished. This was during the recording, Even If and Especially When. I didn't play it until later when it ended up on Invisible Lantern. So I just tested that one time, but I'm really glad that I didn't do it again because I mean, screw your brain.
It could be a totally different world if you had done like 2 and like
right
off. Like, who knows where we'd be?
I don't know. If I took if I hadn't taken the rest of it, who knows what would happen? But anyway, that's what happened. Yeah, so that was like the songwriting process became like me giving Lanigan a tape and him change some of the lyrics, none of the lyrics, all the lyrics, whatever he wanted to do, and that pretty much lasted up until like the Sub Pop changes come, and then and also Uncle Anesthesia too was a lot like that. That was like there was a couple songs that we like reconstructed, like put like Uncle Anesthesia, the song that was like 2 or 3 songs put together, and then Mark did the lyrics. I never really understand what all the lyrics of that song are because he wrote most of them. But so this is like up to the time we were going to do Sweet Oblivion. We didn't know what it was called yet, but we had Shadow of the Season was one of the songs we had, and we tried playing with Dan Peters, and he was like, "This is too weird," It just wasn't his thing, You can't quite, It's like
he couldn't connect to it.
It was like a little more. Yeah, I don't know what you would call that. It was just a little more rock. I don't know what it was, but it was a little different than what we'd done before. But Barrett, that was like he nailed that. It's like that's exactly the kind of stuff that he was great at, And he was a great drummer. I mean, it was all the drummers that are good in different ways. But he just was like John. Like I was like Mark Pickerel was like a Keith Moon type of thing, whereas Barrett was more like John Bonham, the heavy groove thing, and he hit the drum so hard, but he still had a real good groove to him. Some people play like that; they're just really stilted or like stiff.
Right?
He's not like that at all. Barrett and Mark drinking, I think, were the 2 best things that happened to that record.
Yeah,
because suddenly, when Mark was just drinking, he would be social. And he would come over and we'd write songs together. Or at least he'd just sit there and listen to what I was doing. And Van came over too. And all those songs on Sweet Oblivion were either written together or parts of stuff that, we wrote together. And then Mark came up with the lyrics. It was like a real different writing process where it was like a whole band writing stuff together. And we'd go over to where Barrett had a place where we could practice too, which was real nice and convenient.
All right.
And we go over there and Mark would come to practice and we actually practiced for the first time ever. Like for instance, we had like Nearly Lost You was a song Van came up with. He was on acid supposedly and had gone over to Ellensburg with Mark Lanigan. I don't know exactly what happened, but the next day or two he came back and he wrote mainly the chorus and stuff. And then him and me sat down and we kind of fleshed it out and made verses and stuff like that. But it was basically a Van song.
Yeah.
And we knew it was kind of different. And I think from the first, we knew that could be a good single. But we sat down, we played that song, the groove of it for a long time, like over and over again, and work on it, which was like totally bizarre. But Mark, when he was drinking, he'd be into doing this. It was like, Jesus, this is weird and totally different. But so we spent that whole fall, 1, rehearsing, and 2, watching suddenly Nirvana get to be the biggest band in the world, which was really suddenly surreal. Like I went to by this time we were all living over in Seattle.
So did you know those guys before?
Nirvana? Yeah, we played with them a bunch, and Mark was friends with Kurt, and and actually Dylan Carlson lived in Lanigan's house too. From Earth, he was good friends with Kurt too, and Mark and Kurt were good friends. I mean, we all knew him. I'd met him once. I stayed at Kurt's house and Chris's house one time in Tacoma when I went over to see him.
Okay.
They were like, you shouldn't have to drive back. I remember this was right before their single came out. And it was 1988. And they were asked, because, they thought I was totally wise because of an SST and stuff. What do you think about Sub Pop? Should we do a record on Sub Pop? Okay. Yeah, because I'd seen them they played in Ellensburg in early spring of 88. And I was blown away by them. I was they only got to play 5 songs because the place got shut down, Hal Home Center. Yeah. It was too late or something. But I was blown away by him, and so was Mark and everybody else who were just this is seeing the Who when nobody knew about him.
Sure.
So, I mean, I was totally kicked out. So I went over to see him in Seattle. They were quite as good in Seattle, but that's the weird thing with Nirvana. Some nights they would just be amazing as hell. Some nights they weren't quite as good, but
yeah.
Record wise, I was love all their stuff.
Oh yeah, great.
It had a perfect blend of it's metal, punk, and pop. I don't know, different than anybody else.
Yep.
So we watched Nirvana getting huge. I went to a barbecue right before their Nevermind came out at Dan Peters' house, and I think Chris was there. Kurt wasn't there. Chris was there, and he had a tape. Smells Like Teen Spirit, which was the first time I heard it. And I was like, this is interesting. I was like, I don't know. I wouldn't know. It would be the most iconic song of the 90s or whatever.
Oh, man. It sucks you right in. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a month or two later, Halloween, that Paramount show, that was when they knew something was going on because that was probably the last time they could hang out in the lobby of the Paramount. Everybody in all the bands, including Nirvana, was just it was hanging out outside the show, the Crocodile or wherever they were playing at the Paramount, and everyone was talking, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we sold 300,000 records already." We're like, "Jesus, that's insane!" 300,000. It's that's right. Okay, this was before it had a couple million or whatever. Yeah. But that was a great show, though. I just came out the video and record of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember they started out with "Jesus Don't Want Me for a Son" being that Vaseline song. That was great. So remember that. So that was a great show and just a really memorable show because it was kind of a milestone. It was they got big. Right after that, they were on their way, and then suddenly they exploded. So we spent that whole fall of '91 working on all these songs. We were writing together, and then Epic arranged for us to go out to New York to record. I don't know why we did that, but with Don Fleming and John Agnello, who was the engineer. He's a great engineer. Don Fleming was an interesting producer. He was the first guy we worked with. Steve Fisk was the engineer mostly, a little bit producer. Yeah. Don Fleming, he didn't run the board at all. He was just sat there and you do this, that. He was a nice guy and cool producer. Had a lot of ideas for what we were doing. So we went to New York. I remember the first thing that happened when we got to New York was Landon got pissed at me because he owed me some money or something, and I was going up to see my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, lived in New York, and I was going to go up. We had a day or two off. I was going to go up to see her, and he owed me $100 or something. I was trying to get the money from him, and I went to knock at his hotel room door, and he's like, "Can I get the money from him?" He's I yelled or something. I kicked his door, and I think right after that, we decided we were going to break up. Right before we were to go to the studio instead. Because when he was talking about breaking up, I thought that's the thing I was telling you. He was talking about early '91, saying we're going to break. I thought that's what he was talking about before, but I don't know. I was confused. But yeah, for about a day or two, we were "Oh, that's it. What are we going to do?"
You brought in.
But we ended up going in the studio,
and now,
right,
he's taking my money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We went and recorded with Don Fleming. It's a place called Baby Monster. It was down close to the Village. Not too big a studio, but it was nice. They had a lot of great gear and guitar amps and stuff. And we recorded most of it there, and then some of it over at Sear Sound, which is kind of a famous studio. It's a Walter Sear, who's an old-time record guy or recording guy. So that was interesting too. We did a few overdubs over there later. So we got it recorded, and we ended up playing. We played a show too, right in the middle of that. It was Dinosaur Jr. and My Bloody Valentine were playing at the Ritz, the new Ritz that used to be Studio 54.
Okay.
And and we're and who was it? Somebody was supposed to open for them. I can't remember who it was, and they canceled. And we're "Why don't you guys go play?" And I think we played a couple new songs from the record, which was kind of weird.
So we played that. That was kind of fun, right in the middle of the record, which was kind of oddball thing for us to do too. Got the record done. Got it mixed by Andy Wallace, which was probably one of the best moves we made too, because I loved Andy Wallace's mix of Nevermind. He liked the Nevermind album, and he really just brought it to life. And we had him do Dust too, because we liked that one so much. So got it mixed, and then it was coming out in the fall. And we did a bunch of shows in the summer, mostly in Europe. I can't really play much in the United States. So we did a lot of Europe stuff in the summer, including the Reading Festival, with the famous Nirvana Reading Festival. That was like quite a bill. It was like we were on it, the Melvins, L7, Mudhoney, Nick Cave. I can't remember. It was mostly Seattle bands, or at least bands.
Yeah,
like
it was a good one, man. Yeah,
yeah, and that was a long day. And I regret, because I remember I was in the dressing room right before Nirvana went on. I was so tired. And I saw Kurt in that gown. I was like, what the hell is he doing? Chris was in there. Whenever we played Nirvana, we'd have a lot of fun with Chris hanging out in the dressing room, because he was joking around and stuff. And
cool cat. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really fun to be around. Got drunk sometimes, but he was like real fun to be around. Anyway, I sat in the dressing room and I heard Nirvana playing, and I was like, I'm just too tired to go. I've seen them before, blah, blah, blah. Like it ends up being one of the most historic shows ever.
Right.
I'm in the dressing room and I could have watched them. I watched all the other bands.
What's he wearing? I'm going to bed.
So, I can say I regret it. One of the few things I probably regret was like not watching Nirvana on the Reading show. We played a bunch of shows around, all over Europe. Not a full tour, but quite a few shows. That was like, we also did the Roskilde Festival. That was an interesting show.
That one. Yep.
Yeah, in Denmark. It was fun, but that was Nirvana too, and Pearl Jam. It was like 70,000 people. We never been in front of that big a crowd ever. That was huge. Probably the biggest crowd we ever played for. So that was an interesting show for us. What happened was we played 2/3 of the set, and then Mark started having monitor problems, which he didn't deal with very well at all. It was like feedback started, and it was like killing his ears. Hard. And anyway, he got pissed, and for some reason, I guess he was probably drunk or something, started trying to knock the monitors off the stage.
Oh no!
And the crew guys, not our crew guys, but the crew guys from the show, started coming out, and he was trying to fight them and stuff. And so we're sitting here playing, I can't remember if it was either Nearly Lost You or Change Has Come or some song. I can't remember what song it was, but we're playing it and Mark's not singing. We're just like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And finally Mark knocked the monitor off and smashed, there was a $10,000 video camera.
Oh, fuck.
And we're just like, okay, we'll just smash everything. So there was the only time I ever intentionally smashed the guitar. I didn't like the guitar. I had this, it was my second guitar. It was like a weird, what was it? A Gibson Marauder. And it just played like hell. I didn't like it anyway. So I smashed my guitar. Van, I don't think he smashed his bass, but he smashed something up. And Barrett smashed his drums up. Yeah. And Mark was fighting and had to run off. And after the show, they're trying to find Lanigan. He went straight to the dressing room and destroyed the dressing room.
Wow.
Turned everything over. And then he had to hide. They had to hide him because they were like, apparently, I didn't realize this years later, our old manager, Kim White, was like, I guess we had tour insurance and it paid
for everything. Right on.
You always have insurance.
You got lucky.
You never know when your singer is going to go wild and smash a $10,000 video. I guess I didn't know insurance would pay for something.
That seems like a bad liability.
Is that like a Lloyd's of London type?
Yeah, right? There's actually a video. If anyone wants to watch, there's a video of it on YouTube. It's Roskilde Festival.
Oh, no,
Mark Lanigan goes wild or something. There's like a full version and just a part where he goes wild. That was a great time though. After the show, after we got done playing, I remember we went and watched. There was other small tents with other bands. We watched I think Teenage Fan Club and some other Helmet. I remember it's a Helmet.
Oh.
And it was like Denmark in the middle of summer. It was like didn't really get dark, like 2:00 in the morning. It was twilight. So. Yeah. So I don't know. I had a great time after the show.
Right.
And I don't know what happened to Lanigan.
That's kind of funny.
Caught up with him a couple of days later and we did some more shows, but yeah, that was really memorable.
It's kind of funny. We've talked to other artists who've had shows like that, and it's just like everybody thinks like in their mythology that like that must have been a great time. And it's like, no, every time that like anybody destroyed a center stage or hotel room.
It was though a great this time it was for Mark Lanigan. It wasn't a great time,
right? In retrospect, it was great, but like at the time, it was like it's always scary, like a sad thing, and you're like, "What the fuck is going on?"
I know.
It just deteriorates. It's kind of funny to hear that.
That's when we got back to Seattle, and we were going to go on tour. We got tour with Alice in Chains, which was a little weird. You know, the thing with a lot of I was going to say this earlier, the bands in Seattle, like even though they're all lumped together grunge, like they all had their own thing, or at least like Nirvana was like metal, pop, punk rock, like Mudhayne was more like garage and punk rock, and Alice in Chains was always kind of to me like an outsider band because they started out being like a hair metal band. That's what I thought they were when I didn't realize.
Right, they used to have the apostrophe in.
Yeah, actually, and after we went on tour with them, I realized that, it's like, Lane was just such an amazing singer. I mean, he was like, I thought Lanigan was one of the best voices I've ever heard in my life. And Lane's right up there with that. He was like watching him sing he's a small guy, but he was just like amazing. Yeah. I like Alice in Chains a lot nowadays. I never thought about him too much back then because of that weird hair metal thing connection. Yeah. But then, you got like Pearl Jam, which was more like, coming out of the Green River thing. They were kind of like influenced by some of the like probably New York Dolls, maybe some of the like Aerosmith type stuff like that, So Alice in Chains seemed a little odd for us, but we did pretty well with their crowd, I think. I mean, nowadays people wouldn't think that was too weird, like playing Alice in Chains and Screaming Trees playing.
No, it would make sense.
At the time, it seemed a little. I mean, we had the similar management company, and they were on, I think, Columbia. It's still Sony, both Sony bands. So record labels like to get the bands together to tour.
Yes,
I really love that.
Yeah.
So that was like the fall of '92, and right before the record came out, we'd heard of the Singles movie that they were filming. I didn't get involved or anything, but we pulled a little bit of a coup on getting on that soundtrack because we weren't going to be on the soundtrack. And somebody, I don't know if it was Bob Pfeiffer, our A&R guy, or our manager, Kim White, somebody got him to bump Truly, which I didn't find out till years later. The band with Mark Pickerel was in, and Robert Roth and Hiro Yamamoto. They were going to be on the soundtrack. But they didn't have room for only like them or us. Oh no! And somebody got them bumped, maybe because we were on the label. And apparently we did it only if we didn't get paid for it or something. I don't know. We didn't get any advance. I don't know if we got royalties later or not. That was the only million selling record that we ever were on.
Right.
We actually got
whatever.
Yeah. I mean, we sold like 300,000 or 400,000 copies.
That was
maybe someday we'll get a gold record.
I don't know. I've probably bought a couple of copies of it over the years.
Yeah, we still sell the things. I don't know if they count the ones that are reissues. So we had a couple of reissues over the years.
But do they have Italian vinyl on that?
I don't know if it ever came out in Europe on vinyl. But they didn't want to do vinyl really. In 1992, vinyl was considered dead.
Yeah, it really was.
It was like they put out the American version that was on vinyl of Sweet Oblivion was a black cover with the CD cover in it and was called the One Foot in the Grave vinyl edition.
Oh, fuck.
You look it up on the internet. Yeah. I mean, it was like vinyl, they considered vinyl was like gone. Yeah. That's it. No more vinyl. 1992, that was pretty early. Oh, yeah. CDs had completely taken over. The One Foot in the Grave vinyl edition. And yeah.
I can remember being ashamed of mine around that time. Yeah. 91, 92. Didn't tell anybody.
Yeah. So we always got we got the pretty good deal on being on a single soundtrack, but not getting money for it. And then we got MTV. We got the remember they had Buzzbin, Buzz Clip. Yeah. We got the Buzz Clip, except that we had to share it with Paul Westerberg. So we only got half as many plays, So we made the video. We went to the Ellensburg Rodeo Fairgrounds. Somebody's great idea. I can't remember whose idea that was. It was actually kind of cool because it was nod to the Ellensburg heritage.
Right.
And even though I only went to the rodeo once, but that was the huge deal in Ellensburg, Labor Day weekend every year.
It's like a big
third largest 3-day rodeo in the world. So I always advertise it. So anyway, got the video in the fairgrounds and did some other. I don't know. The video's kind of the performance part's all right. The other parts are just like I don't know if you ever seen the Nearly Lost You video. It's kind of like walk around the place, burn some pictures up, and then they also got the guy that they had in all the videos for that movie was what's that guy's name? He's a guy who used to hang out in the scene. I can't remember his name. He's putting up posters. They got a little clip of that here and there of singles, you know.
Yeah.
That's like a little clip of that here and there too. So it was an all right video. I mean, but it played the MTV Buzz clip, shared, so only half as many plays with Paul Westerberg. But a few months into the tour, we're actually selling a few records. Mm-hmm. I can't remember how many they told us, but maybe 100,000 or something. Okay. So what do we do then? Oh, then we got to go to Europe with Alice in Chains. Colder and shit. Winter '93. That was like. By that point, Mark was starting to get into, I think Lane helped a little bit. I didn't help him, but, being around Lane probably didn't. Yeah. But having to get heroin and stuff in Europe, that's not helping either. So, he's probably strung out a lot of the time, not having any. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So probably that was like the time, right? Probably, I don't know what I wasn't too hanging out with Mark in his personal life. But at some point, he started getting way more into heroin, and that sort of like really made complicated everything a million times more than anything. And it really, became harder to do stuff because as opposed to the drinking, this was the antisocial drug that made him not want to hang around anybody, who wasn't doing that stuff. So, so we got there. We had the Letterman show. We did that. That was like it was a late night Letterman show, but that was fun. We had a great time doing that.
Good performance too.
No, that was the fight night before the Letterman show.
Oh, was it? I
didn't witness it because I was lucky enough to stay with my future wife, girlfriend Janet at the time in upstate New York, and our next show was in. That next day in Asbury Park, New Jersey. The guys they were staying overnight in that town. They went down to the club. We were going to play it the next night. And I can't remember exactly. Somewhere there's an article about it. You can probably find it somewhere. I posted it on the Screaming Trees website a few months ago. It tells more than I know about it. So I know a lot of this from either hearing about it or like reading the article.
Okay.
But they got a fight with the bouncers. And they kicked him out of the club. Mm-hmm. But then they decided to go back in for some reason. I don't know why. And all Van and Barrett and Mark and a couple other guys, or road guys, I think John Hicks. Was Rod. I can't remember Rod Doak was still at the time. But anyway, they got beat up. And Barrett got his shoulder messed up. I didn't really realize at the time he was hurt because he played a couple days later when we played in Boston. But, the one thing, the Letterman show, they always wanted you to play with a band.
Yeah.
So they had, I guess, because I don't know why Barrett didn't play congas or something. He loved to play congas and stuff. But they had their drummer and their guitar player. And because of the time we only had me, I had the guitar player play the lead part because when I was live, I always just played the rhythm. I couldn't really play the lead and the thing. Later, when we had Josh home play with us, I got to play the lead and stuff.
Yeah.
But, I had to, it's kind of like, we only got one guitar player, had a balanced lead. And
that guy's done a few things.
Yeah, a couple. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got to meet David Letterman, got to meet Paul. One of the most surrealistic things I ever had happen to me was I got to have a phone call from Paul Schaefer to talk about the call the day before.
Oh, really?
And he's like, yeah, that song Nearly Lost You. It's a monster. Like imagine Paul's Paul. Voice. Yeah, it's a monster, Paul Schaefer. And then we went there that day. He's went to the practice room with the piano and he's like, here's the song, da da da. Yeah, he knows it. Okay. He figured it out already. Just weird. Playing Paul Schaefer.
Yeah.
And then meeting David Letterman. He was really tall.
Is he? Yeah, I've heard that.
And of course I don't know. He was must have been 6'4".
Yeah.
Of course, I'm the shortest one in the band, so I'm 6'1", and I'm the shortest one in the band.
Wow. Yeah. One thing I always appreciate about Letterman is he said at one time that he was like people in the media wanted me to do interviews and I was never really good at that.
Yeah.
But I'm good at saying hey, I like your earrings. And then I went with it and I'm like, that's my fucking hero. Right there.
Yeah, it was really cool being on that show because I remember I used to watch this morning show when I was in college. I remember before I go to college, I was on. Yeah. So anyway, we did that. That was fun. And the next day we had a show in Boston, And people were recognizing us. Hey, we saw you on the Leno show all over the place. That was like one of the most recognized times I was recognized more than any. Like right after the Letterman show. And then so anyway, that was in the fall in '92. And then after we came back from Europe, we did the Leno show. It wasn't quite as fun, but it was interesting. Yeah. We got everything set up. We were getting ready to go on. They had a curtain, and so my guitar tech's like got everything set up, and I got the guitar. I'm like, wait a minute, the guitar is not working. It's like 30 seconds till you go on. I'm like, holy crap! It's like, no way. And like a couple seconds before we start, the guitar starts working again. Yeah, we played, and then we went over to our A&R guy's house and watched it later. And I remember, I haven't seen that one much, but I guess Mark thought he was way out of tune or something. He wasn't real happy with it, but it was on the on the Leno show. So what did we play? I think Dollar Bill. Yeah. Yeah, we did Nearly Lost You. Yeah. So that was what the next single was Dollar Bill. The fun video for that one where we got to get hose turned on. That was fun. Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. Like Mark got to go drive out in the desert in a car, if I remember right. And then when it came time to do the inside where it's raining, like Mark's like, I'm not getting rained on, of course. So they didn't turn it on him, but like a guitar, electric guitar, was not plugged in. I can't remember if I used one of mine or if I got some, I can't remember what it was. But they turn a hose on us and like we get soaked while we're like pantomiming to the song. It's like,
at least your shit wasn't plugged in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah, it's kind of funny. I've run into a couple stories you had on like the Screaming Trees Facebook group about like broken guitars. Like this guitar was one of my favorites, and I broke the headstock off of it.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah. I'd throw the guitars around and do bad stuff to them, and I kept breaking. I got 2 or 3 newer Les Pauls that just like the damn things were snapping like hell. My old 72 Les Paul I had, that thing I was pretty rough with it. That never even came close to breaking. It got stolen later from Van had it after we were done. We finished that last show in 2000. I came back. I went back to, living in New York at the time. Went back to New York and didn't really take much of my gear with me. And I left that guitar with Van, and years later, he had it and got stolen. Yeah. So it's out there somewhere. It used to belong to Chris Cornell. It's like I got it when we did Uncle Anesthesia. It was like, he was like, hey, why don't you try this guitar? I was like, yeah, it's really great. It's like, hey, I'll trade you. So we buy him that silver, he had a couple of them. It was a silver Gretsch.
Yeah, the Gretsch, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then he gave me that guitar in exchange. So that's nice. There's a few pictures of it around. There's one picture of him playing with it. He had 2 that looked like, one had a Soundgarden sticker on it. That's not it.
Okay.
I've seen one picture of him playing it, but.
So what's your favorite piece? What's your favorite guitar, you think?
Oh, favorite guitar? Well, probably sentimentally, it's my old Firebird I had for years when we first. That was the only guitar I had. Mm-hmm. Like at the time, I had 2 or 3 others, but they kept getting broken. Like I had a really nice SG, like a 60-something SG, and I finally got a second guitar. Like I had my Firebird, and it was like we were playing in Eugene, Oregon, and I had it set up, but I didn't even use it during the show. It was like setting against the amp, and I didn't have a guitar stand. And after the show, like Mike Johnson, who's in the other band Snake Pit, he's like, man, I got bad news. Your guitar broke. I was like, Jesus. It's like, oh, no. So that ended up, I don't know if you ever, the Purple Outside record, my first, it was just sort of solo album. It's like a band name.
Yeah, okay.
That's how I call my first solo album. But I called my first solo album the Microdot Gnome thing. Right. This was in 1989. This one came out. Yeah, the guitar on that is the SG that got broke. It's actually broke in the picture. I just screwed it back together. It's kind of a memorial to the guitar.
That sucks.
Yeah, I don't know whatever happened to that thing because it was never to get it fixed.
2 quick things about that. I've got an uncle who has a Firebird. It's like a late 60s model. It's like it's the first time. I mean, I have a lot of guitars, but a lot of my guitars are cheap guitars. And it's the first time I played like a classic, like old 60s model guitar. I get it now. That guitar is like oh my fucking God. I'm like, I've told him like, okay, you might die soon. Nobody wants this. That's the guitar I want. And then I'm looking to buy it an SG. I think I need that.
Yeah.
I think I need an SG.
Later I got another, I think it's either 64 or 67. Those weird serial numbers that Gibson makes it hard to tell. But it's an SG that I've had since the mid 90s. It like one day when we were on tour in the 90s, my guitar tech was like, man, you got a crack in the neck. Mm-hmm. It wasn't broken; it was a crack. So a while later, I was like, man, I could just put a couple of screws in there, and I bet it'd be fine. And it's been like that for 20-some years.
Oh man,
I guess still plays great. There's like these 2 little screws in the back of the neck, but it works fine. And but I still, that's the only old guitar I still have. I have some Epiphones. I like Epiphones a lot. They're great guitars, and like they don't cost much at all. I got an Epiphone Firebird now. I sold my old Firebird. My Firebird was a weird one. It was 81 with this weird Moog electronics. I never could figure out what it did. It like made it sound really trebly, and it had a battery. The battery would die.
You'll look at those and the Firebirds, and it's like the range anywhere in price from like $120 to $5,000. It's like,
I know,
these all look like the same guitar, and then you find out it's like, oh, an 81 or a it's like, it's crazy how much all over the place they are in manufacturing.
Oh, I know. I've never played an old 60s Firebird, but this one was like interesting.
They're so sweet. I mean, the neck on those things it's so smooth, and the fretting. I mean, I think I could play, when I picked it up, I could play twice as well as I could.
Now you want to get a really expensive guitar, but I need to spend money on other things.
I buy Epiphones, I buy, Squires, I buy,
I don't mind the cheaper guitars too much though, because I've if I can't fight the guitar,
you gotta work for it.
I can't. I mean, like, how people use like low action or really slinky string. I always use mediums with reasonable medium action, because like that's a whole lot of my sound. Like people always like, what effects do you use? What amps do you use? I use all sorts of different amps over the years. I had a couple I really liked. I used different guitars, but a lot of my sound, I guess, as far as I can tell, is just the way I play. It doesn't really, I could play somebody else's guitar setup and it wouldn't sound like theirs. It would sound like me, because the way it's really idiosyncratic, because I totally taught myself to play, just by, not by playing other people's songs, but just by, it's weird because I did it on bass. I first learned how to play bass, and especially I learned a lot of Yes stuff like Chris Squire. So I learned my way around the fretboard with the bass. But then with the guitar, instead of I did learn some songs in that cover band, but mostly I just sit around playing, and then later writing songs.
Well, that's the thing. I think right now I have an Epiphone Explorer, and it's like I don't know, maybe it's a couple $100. I don't know. I got a pretty good deal on it, but it has the built-in tuner on it and stuff, but it's got the slinky, it plays on tans. It's really tight fretted and everything. I use that when I want to sound good, and then I use my Squire Telecaster when I want to work on something,
right?
To learn.
I don't know what I do with slinky strings. I don't think I slinky strings.
Yeah, I don't. They're okay when you want to sound really great, but I mean, my Tele is really my worker, and that's the Squire, just a Squire Bullet, cheap guitar.
Yeah, I was thinking about getting.
But you know what? I mean, those things, they're manufactured by robots.
Yeah,
but they're put together in the same way.
I know. I mean,
that the Strat is, or the Tele or whatever is the same specs, everything else. Basically. Just this is put together by a robot.
I know. I mean, I don't got a problem with the cheaper guitars. I could see spending like $5,000 for an old 60 guitar.
Yeah.
Instead of $5,000 for a brand new guitar is like, why? I mean, I'll spend like $500 for one that I like just as much.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yep.
Oh, they'll show the videos of people playing like a super expensive guitar or super cheap guitar.
Yeah.
They got the blindfold.
Joe Bonamassa looking at the Les Paul. And look at the Epiphone versus the Gibson.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, this is the Gibson. No, that's the Epiphone. You're wrong.
Yeah, when I bought some new guitars like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I guess, I got an Epiphone bass, an Epiphone acoustic, and an Epiphone Firebird. It was like the Firebird was like $400. Like I use it all the time. It's a great guitar. I mean, I really like it a lot. It plays really well. And then I got the old SG if I want something that's like a little bit easier to play. Like for leads sometimes. Like I used that a lot, the leads on the last record, Unicorn Curry record.
Yeah.
But I let it go. I got a few years, like about, 15 years ago, I had it sitting behind this chair for a long time, and it fucking got all messed up, and the bindings came off the damn fingerboard and stuff, fretboard. No. Yeah, I was like, I actually fixed it myself. I don't know how I did it, but I like got some binding stuff. I glued it, and now it's fine. So I don't know. Wow. I'm not much of a guitar fixer, but I used to take guitars apart and then try to put them back together. Like, I had lots of old cheapo pawn shop guitars way back. Did a neat pawn shop.
I think a lot of kids did that, just trying to see what they could come up with their own.
Yeah, I used to take a lot of electronic stuff apart. They never get put back together.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, let's see. Back to what we were. Oh, the Leno show. We did a Leno show, and then we finally did our own tour. That was pretty cool. It was with the Poster Children, who were from Illinois, and Pond. There was a Portland band, not the Pond that's around now. They were Pond. I think they had was it Sub Pop album? They had 2 or 3 records, and they're from Portland. And it doesn't have anything to do with the band nowadays, or at least a few. I know they had some albums from mid 2000s, not the old Pond that we toured with, but this other one. They were really cool too. So we did a tour of the U.S. Just on our own, and did pretty well. We did, like medium to larger size clubs, and sold out a lot of it. It was a good tour. And then we got the fun of the summer of '93 doing the Spin Doctors and Soul Asylum Alternative Nation tour.
Oh, wow.
Which was Spin Doctors, just fun. Soul Asylum was kind of on a down, even though commercially they were doing better. I don't know. My wife's favorite band at the time was probably Soul Asylum, and she was pretty excited about it, but they weren't quite as good as they had been. So she wasn't like dream come true getting to go. She went on a lot of the tour. We drove around in the rental car a lot, but it was like 60 shows all summer long, just grueling. That was like, by that time we finally got a tour bus which is expensive as hell, but if you're going to be on tour like for a year straight,
I'm sure it makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, if we had been in a van that whole time, because we were on tour on and off for a whole year during 92 and 93, it was like, we had a lot of fun, but it's like, where are we today? And every place we play in that summer of that Alternative Nation Spin Doctors tour was like these places called sheds, like outside places that have like a cover, and like they're built up with the earth, thing on the back where people sit. And so, I don't know what part of the country we're in. It's like every place looks exactly the same. The hotels are all the same. Staying in some pretty nice hotels though, because especially like we stayed in a lot of the same places as the other bands would. So I don't know. That was interesting tour. It got us a lot of different fans, I think. People. Because I still run into people. It's like, oh, we saw you on that tour with the Spin Doctors.
Right. Yeah.
We played all over the country at a lot of shows. So I don't know. And apparently, I guess I didn't remember this until I was talking to a guy who was a Butthole Surfers manager years ago, Tom Bunch. He was reminding me that I got offered to do the Butthole Surfers tour. And who else was on that tour? No. Somebody else. It was the summer '93, and we could have done that instead. It was like, that would have been fun too. Yeah. And, I probably would have got a lot of people seeing us on that too, but we probably got some different people. So apparently by the end of that summer, we'd sold something like in the US 300,000 copies, which was way more than we'd ever sold before. So Epic was like, do another record. And grunge was pretty big still in '93. And we were like, okay, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
In the middle of the end of the tour, like both Van and I both got married, not to each other,
right?
But my wife, Van,
it's legal in
Washington. Van, his ex-wife. I mean, I'm still married and live with my wife. We had to celebrate our 26th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations!
In August. But so we got married. We went to we got married in Seattle and had a nice wedding there. And Love Battery played at our wedding, which was really cool.
That's nice. Yeah.
That was like pretty wild.
That is awesome.
So they were my favorite, one of my favorite bands, and great guys too. Then Van got married right after the tour. And so I was like, okay, what are we going to do now? We're going to do another record real quick, and hopefully we'll make a lot more money, right? Because we haven't made very much money yet, just a little bit here and there, maybe. We're still like kind of like, why are we doing this? So we're selling a lot more records, and maybe we're gonna make a living at it. We don't have time to have a job.
Yeah,
this is a full-time job, and plus more, like 24 hours a day sometimes. So
videotapes just aren't selling like they used to.
Right. And Epic wasn't like, oh yeah, here's money to live on.
Exactly.
Some record labels will do that.
Yeah,
they didn't really want to do that, or at least our management wasn't getting to do it. So we had to write. We hadn't, been on tour for a year, hadn't been writing songs, because usually I'm sitting around writing songs and hadn't really written anything. So I went back to New York for a few weeks, wrote some stuff, and they had to go back to Seattle. And we were supposedly recording in December, and we got Don Fleming to come out to Seattle and John Aniello, the same team that did Sweet Oblivion.
Right.
We got together, and unfortunately, by this time, Mark was pretty deep into the heroin thing, and just, getting together with him just wasn't happening at all. And we just weren't ready to go in the studio yet, but we did. And, we just recorded what we had. And for some reason, Don Fleming was just sort of not, I don't know why on that record, he spent most of the time playing a video game. He had this video game constantly, like in front of the monitor, in front of the board. And he played the video game all the time while we were recording. It's like that's all he did was play the damn video game. And Mark was mostly in the either gone or in the lounge the whole time. Yeah. So it was kind of like, okay, let's get the record recorded. So we recorded, I don't know, Mark did vocals on some of the songs. And then the idea was like, okay, we're going to wrap this up here and we're going to go out to New York and finish it up. And we went back to that Sear sound place, did some overdubs. Mark didn't really finish singing all the songs. And we're like, okay, we need to get some more songs. So we just kind of wrapped it up, and we got a couple of those songs. Well, Dying Days was a different version. That was one of the songs I wrote out in New York. Okay. And that ended up getting forwarded to what ended up becoming Dust. And what else? On that, there's a epic compilation called Ocean of Confusion that came out in 2005. There's 2 songs from that session on there, Paperback Bible and Watch Pocket Blues. Those were 2 of the songs. Mark re-sang them years later, like right before that came out. But those are 2 of the songs that were like on the, I guess, call it aborted record.
Yeah. So are you doing your own shit at this time? And like starting to,
No, I never. The Purple Outside record came out of the time when we all decided we were going to do like the Kiss records, like all do solo records.
Yeah.
On SST was the original idea. Mark got hooked up with Sub Pop because he'd moved over to Seattle, and he did his on Sub Pop, and then ours ended up being New Alliance, which was the Solomon Grundy record and my record. Yeah, I don't know why Pickerel didn't do a record if he wanted to sing. I guess he could have. But New Alliance was like associated. I think Mike Watt started, if I'm not mistaken, Minutemen. But that's what that came out of. We're just all going to do solo records, and I just had a lot of stuff that was more psychedelic. Actually, a lot of those songs on the Purple Outside record we recorded originally when Donna was in the band, like in the fall of 1988. We had gone to Los Angeles with her, and for some reason Van came too, even though he wasn't going on tour. We were going to go on tour right after that, and we recorded a double record for SST right before Buzz Factory. We didn't know Buzz Factory was going to be done the way it was. We thought we were going to do a double record. And a lot of my songs on the Purple Outside record, there's somewhere, I don't know if there exists. We went to try to find the tapes later, and supposedly they'd been recorded over. But then somebody came up with a couple of tracks recently. So I'm not sure what happened to the tapes. But a lot of those songs were recorded, probably most of them, for the Post Invisible Lantern album that never came out. We had 2 aborted records, and that's like, so we went on tour. Mark's listening to the stuff. It's like, I just don't think it's quite good enough to release or something. I don't know what it was, but Donna did that tour with us. But then Van, he had his first son, Ulysses, and had to get married because he had a son to his first wife, Lori Birdseye, not the person he married later. This was in 1988. And
was he named after the Cream song?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, I think so. He's 30 years old and has a bunch of kids of his own now. But but Ulysses is anyway. He had to have like 3 jobs because the band wasn't making a penny at the time. It's like we're paying to do it pretty much. Or at least not making any money, making just enough to like gas and hotels.
Yeah.
But for some reason, he decided he was going to come back and we'd let Donna go. I don't know if she was upset or not, but and I'd written a couple more songs at the time. What was End of the Universe and End of the Universe? No, it was Flower Web, Black Sun Morning, and Revolution. So we left behind some of the really psychedelic stuff. It's on the Purple Outside record. Got a couple more songs, and had heard the Mudhoney record. We played with Mudhoney. We're like, we want to record Jack and Dino. So we got Reciprocal, Jack and Dino, December 1988. Did it pretty quick in 2 weeks. Pickerel was still in the band at the time. And that became Buzz Factory. not the aborted one with Don. And and then in the spring went on tour, and then we went on tour for that in the fall. The record didn't come out in time. It was like SST was starting to have problems in 1989. It's like they didn't get the record out on time when we were on tour because they were having money problems or something. But that was the first aborted record. And then we getting back to the post Sweet Oblivion thing that ended up eventually becoming Dust after a long 2 years. We regrouped. I went back to New York a while, stayed with my wife finally after we got married. And then
it sounds awful.
Basically the plan is like, I'm going to come back. I rented a house in Seattle, and my wife came out for the summer. She had to work, she's a college professor. She had to work during the year. So I rented a house for like a year and a half, 2 years in Seattle. My wife came in the summer, but the rest of the year I was there by myself. And I spent almost 2 years, a year and a half, like being chained to the 4-track, having like Mark, making me. Well, first, I remember the first in the summer, we got Mark over there with Van. Mark, me, and Van were at the house I was renting. And Mark was lying in the bed in the other room, and we were trying to write a song. We came up with the first part of Gospel Plow, and Mark was like, he's singing that part, which I didn't realize later it's just like a old gospel song. Yeah, like the beginning of Gospel Plow. It's like he didn't write the lyrics. It's sort of like some old gospel song. And then we did the rest. But every once in a while, we'd hear from Mark, like, okay, that's good, or something, coming from the other room. That's about all he could manage to do. That was about one of the few times he ever came over because, like, it was so opposite of Sweet Oblivion, because Sweet Oblivion is like, everyone get together and work, and we're, like, playing these songs over and over again. And we wouldn't even get together and rehearse at all. It was just like, we didn't really play many shows during the time. So I was chained to the 4-track, and my whole life consisted of, after my wife went back to New York, was getting up in the morning, writing the song. I better write a song, because about, at night, sometime in 11 to 2 o'clock in the morning, Mark's going to call me and say, what's going on? Which means like, what did you write? What song did you write? And if I wrote a song, hopefully I had to drive across town, my old Chrysler Baron that broke down. It's like about $1,000 car. That was the other thing. I got the house and $1,000 car that would get me around Seattle for a year and a half. It conked out right when I drove by. Yeah, that was funny.
So it's all just a slow deterioration.
Yeah, it was. It was like 2 years in limbo. And like, I'm like, suddenly, instead of loving to write songs, I'm like being forced to. And it's just this horrible job and not really even get paid for. I don't know how we were making money during that time. I guess we were getting money from our man. We had these big time managers that we ditched our other managers. We were managed by Q Prime. These guys Peter mentioned. Bernstein, what's his name? They managed Def Leppard, they had managed AC/DC. They were like they decided our guy got us hooked up with them because they wanted to get into the new grunge thing, right? And a little while after that, they started doing Smashing Pumpkins. But with us, they were like, what are we going to do? So they actually loaned us money. The actual managers I couldn't stand, but the people that worked at the company were really nice and really cool. And this guy Tony DiCiaccio, you'd have to call him and say, can we borrow money? It's like, I don't know, he didn't want to, but then he'd loan it to us every time. I don't know, we paid him back, I don't know.
So what was your first kind of, when you saw that kind of falling apart and everything, it's like, okay, I'm gonna start doing my own thing. What was your like avenue there?
Writing in the middle of that time in 1995, we like had a breath of fresh air. We got offered to go to Australia and play the Big Day Out tour.
Big Day Out,
5 shows, big, like big Lollapalooza type thing. That was fun. Yeah, I had a great time down there. It was like suddenly this massive fun out of all this hell. So we got back and went back into the same thing. It's like we'd sent, like right before we went to Australia, we had to like send the managers, the big time managers, like demos of all the songs. So they hadn't heard any of them. And Mark hadn't sang any of them either. So like the day before we go to Australia, like I had to do laundry and a whole bunch of stuff, but I ended up down at the place rehearsing in where Alice in Chains was rehearsing down at NAF's. This guy, Mark Naffersey, had his big complex, had a rehearsal space and a whole bunch of rehearsal space. Alice in Chains was practiced there and we borrowed it from him. We went down there and I got Mark in there to record the vocals and I had to do all sorts of weird stuff, like put him on ADAT, and it was just confusing, because I had these 4 tracks and I had to like get another track for Mark to sing. So I had to do all this engineering stuff, and he's got a damn cold or something. I don't know if it was a cold. Who knows? He was hoarse as hell. Could hardly sing. He must have been whispering, singing the song. So he has to sing like 20 or 30 songs, give him the tape, and then on the way to the airport, if we get to the airport, we're going to FedEx the tape. So we get to Australia, and it's like, where's the tape? It's supposed to overnight to us. It's like, what? So we call FedEx. It's like, it's gone. It turns out the damn FedEx, after all this work, the FedEx package had fallen down beside the counter at the airport. So he had to I guess I had a tape with me. I don't know if I think I had to dupe it and send it from Australia or something.
Wow.
So we come back and it's the same thing. Back to the grinding wheel, which is actually one of the songs. It's on my demo thing that we did have for that album that we recorded the music of with for Dust, but we never did any vocals. Back to the grinding wheel anyway. Of writing songs for 2 or 3 more months. And it's like, I don't know. I don't think they like the stuff that well. We got to come up with something else like Nearly Lost You. And we were even doing stuff like trying to write stuff like Stone Temple Pilots song, trying to write stuff like, which is so against everything that I always,
they get into that trap.
Yeah. That kind of shit. And we never did write anything like that. Or there was 1 or 2 songs that sounded kind of like Nearly Lost You. I don't know. We never used any of them.
Right.
But over that time, there's so many, like probably a couple hundred songs. There were some good ones, there's actually several really good ones that I still have like not very good vocal performances with Mark singing because of that demo.
Yeah.
I think it's probably most of them, like the stuff on that demo tape, not with him singing, but my demo albums of the songs like Toll and Bells, one called Violins and Violence, which had some different title at the time. Some of those that didn't get on the record, but also the song, most of them that were on the record, Dust. But then we go like, okay, we can do the record maybe with George Drakoulias. And I'd heard of him at Black Crowes and especially at Jayhawks, that Hollywood Town Hall record, which I was really into.
Yeah.
He really had a classic rock sort of feel to what he did. So he came up to Seattle, listened to us. And at the same time, bizarre little side note, Mark was still friends. I don't know if you call it friends with Courtney Love. And this was only about a year after Kurt died.
Yeah.
And that last Nirvana song, You're Right. She had the idea to give it to us, to give it to Mark, and we would record it.
Oh, really?
So I get this is what I think I still have it around here somewhere. I get a copied tape. You're Right. Of course, we love, and we listened to it. It was a fucking really good song.
Yeah.
Basically, it was the same song that was released. It was probably remixed and stuff. But so we learned it, and I don't know what Mark, he told us about it, had us, but I think he really didn't really want to do it because he came down, we played it, he never sang it, and I think it just didn't jive well with him. God knows what would have been like if we would have come out with a Kurt Cobain song a year after. Maybe we would have been famous. I don't know.
Wow.
That would have been a weird twist. Yeah.
And one other weird little side note having to do with Kurt. I don't know. Apparently, Van was telling me I don't talk to Mark really at all. I talked to him a few years ago on the phone. Okay. We were nice and talked to him about what he's doing. Married and has a house and stuff. And I have a nice life and have a house and wife and kid and stuff. But apparently Van did an interview where he was talking about, I guess Van said he remembered right when Kurt was missing right before they found him dead, that he and Dylan Carlson and supposedly Lanigan have been driving around looking for him with a private detective. I have nothing about, because I was in New York. I had nothing to do with anything at that time. I heard about it on the New York news. Was quite shocked, but I'm kind of glad I wasn't around then, because being in Seattle would have down. But a year later, when I was living in that house where we were writing the songs, Mark comes over and Kurt or Courtney had given him. Kurt had an old Dodge Dart. It didn't look that great. It was a cool car. It just was kind of didn't need a paint job. Mark comes over and says, "Hey man, Kurt, I got this from Kurt after he died or whatever, and the trunk's locked and I can't get it open."
Oh shit.
And I couldn't help him get it. I don't know if he ever got it. I don't know what was in the trunk. Yeah. Dead bodies. no idea. That was just one of those, like,
Was it Al Capone's fault?
Yeah, it was like Al Capone's fault. Exactly.
Yeah. It could have been Geraldo Rivera. Like special. What's in Kurt's trunk?
Yeah, right, exactly. So George Drakoulias was like, okay, that was cool. We got to. We went to LA and we did 3 weeks of pre-production rehearsals, which really helped a lot. We'd never done anything like that before. We rehearsed at some place, and Ian Astbury's band was practicing next door. We met him in Australia. We were on the same. They were on the big day out, and I remember he was like, oh, he was really nice, and we really liked the Cult, and he was practicing next door, and like Jacob Dylan band was practicing there. It was kind of one of those places where everyone's practicing. So practice for 3 weeks on a lot of songs. We had several songs we ended up not doing or recording and not doing vocals on, but we had I think everything we did vocals on we released, because there was like I think the only song besides what the 10 songs was Silver Tongue, which was the B-side. That was one of the songs from the second aborted record that was when we did that song. It was like, well, we were thinking of being a single before for the other one, but we'll just go crazy on it, like do something completely different. And Drakoulias got some woman to sing like soul vocals, background vocals, and like I just kind of like U2-ish and a rhythmy guitar part. It's like it was originally like the Rolling Stones or something, like a ripoff of Sympathy for the Devil or something. Yeah, kind of like that, but it ended up being really weird. But it didn't make the record as a B-side. So Drakoulias was like, man, he was a producer. He was like a 60s producer. He got in there, like worked on the songs, like not just the sounds, but like the arrangements of the songs. And then the master stroke was he got somehow, I guess he knew him. He got Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers keyboard player Ben Montench to play keyboards. And man, that guy is just the most amazing keyboard player. On that song Traveler with the Mellotron.
Oh, okay.
He played 2 Mellotrons at the same time, and he did that whole damn part. I don't know if he worked on it before, live, with the solo, with one hand on each keyboard. And I sat there and I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It's like, how do you do that, man? The guy is like, and that and some of the other production touches that, we had some stuff like on the song Make My Mind. Chris Goss, who's in Masters of the Universe, he came over and helps with the vocals. He did this, he coached us and sang along on the backup vocals on that. He did a weird, really almost commercial backup vocals, but it worked. It's kind of like weird. I don't know. I always thought that we wanted that to be the first single, but they were like, oh, I know the record company did better. But at that point, it was like, we did the record and we were really, really, really thought it turned out great. And I remember we went up to New York. I was probably staying out there and we were mixing it with Andy Wallace again. We went down to the studio and he was mixing it. And I remember talking to Mark. He was like, well, if nothing else, after all this time going by, I think we can be proud of what we did on this record. And I think, I know Mark's talked about, I don't like the old Screaming Trees stuff. It was so psychedelic. And it's like, I didn't really feel comfortable singing on it because some of the songs were his, but most of them, I still consider, I don't really play any of the songs I consider I've been doing a lot of acoustic stuff. Like last year, I did a lot of acoustic Screaming Trees stuff. And the songs that, Mark wrote majority of it do. There's a couple songs the only 2 songs, maybe 3. So there's 3 or 4 songs I didn't have anything to do with writing, like Dollar Bill and Julie Paradise. Dollar Bill, I was sitting there when Van and Mark wrote it. But I recorded it, but I didn't write any of it. So, that's one of the only songs I don't get credit on. And Julie Paradise, too. It's always one of my favorite songs to play. I always love that song, this last song on Sweet Oblivion. Yeah. So, it's like, I think we can really be proud of this record. And I think, Mark's, from a couple of interviews I've read, I think he still likes the epic stuff.
I mean, you'd have to. I mean, what did you guys have all together? It's like 15 releases. I mean,
not that many. No, 7 actual albums.
7 albums. And then
2 EPs. Yeah.
Okay. And then how many releases have you had, though, on record?
Oh, me? Let's see. I've had the Purple Essay record and 3 actual solo records.
3 solo records, but...
Yeah, single or 2, like a sub-pop single.
The EPs and
Grasshopper Stage.
Anything else you consider?
Lanigan's had about 10,000 releases. I swear to God. He collaborates with so many people. I've never seen anybody collaborate with everybody.
That's probably why. I mean, you look at the internet, and I mean, that's where I got the number from. It's just like because so many people are like, okay, this EP, this is technically a Trees track. This is technically not. I'm like, I'm like 15. I don't know. But prolific.
I think he's probably had
least that many albums just himself. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. And then he probably has had hundreds of songs and bands that he's collaborated with over the years. I mean, well, including Queens of the Stone Age. He did a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And then he's really keeps really busy. I don't think I could keep that busy.
You could probably play a pretty interesting musical game of 6 Degrees just with yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're connected to everybody.
Hey, did you ever meet Tom Waits?
Never met Tom Waits. Mark might have. I don't know. Everyone compares Mark to Tom Waits, even though other than this kind of the gruff.
All right. We have an in joke here, just on the show itself, where we've interviewed a lot of people who have a Tom Waits story. So
I never met Tom
Waits. We're trying to do a compilation.
Yeah,
we're going to get him on one of these days. We get enough people to tell a Tom Waits story.
We just always have to ask now. It's like an in joke. We just have to ask. But it's a Tom Waits story.
So we were lucky to get Lollapalooza that year. It was the last. I think that was the last year they had it as a tour. But by '96, that was the year that the alternative music just kind of took a downturn, and we did all right. I think we sold maybe 100,000. I don't know. I've never seen our exact sales figures, but enough to at least keep us going and not freak the record company out, because they knew that there was definitely downturn as far as alternative music went. But we did our own tour first, U.S. tour. Didn't make it to the Northwest during that. And then we did the Lollapalooza with, it was Metallica was headlining in Soundgarden. So that was cool doing with Soundgarden. Metallica was a little corporate by that point. They had a fucking airplane. I remember Chris Cornell riding on their airplane one time. Van rode on the tour bus with Soundgarden because Chris Cornell rode on the airplane. And that was like when... Were we going to Atlanta? No, they had a show in Atlanta or something. Yeah, they had a show in Atlanta that wasn't part of Lollapalooza. And that was like the summer of the Olympics, and the bomber and Van was there when they had the bomber
really?
Thing, Yeah, so he lucked out riding the tour bus going to the Olympic bomber or something.
Wow.
Yeah, Lollapalooza, we had a good time. My wife and I drove around the rental car again, for a lot of it. Yeah. So I didn't have to ride in the bus a lot of times. That was fun. Still having fun with Mark
Yeah, I don't remember which Lollapalooza I went to, but I went to Lollapalooza. It was a good time. It was the year that Ministry, Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers. Right.
Yeah, I went to the very first one in Seattle in '91. That was interesting.
Yeah, I think mine was the second year that they did it, but it was a blast.
Yeah, it's a lot funner when you're backstage.
I bet.
I can imagine.
It's fucking hot.
I don't know how people go to those damn festivals and don't go backstage. I've never been to a festival backstage before, So it's
there wasn't anything
go on your bus and lie down or the dressing room or something. It's
it certainly was.
Yeah. So we got that wrapped up, did that, and then we got the real fun of getting to go on Oasis's first U.S. tour.
Nice.
That was real nice. We got this crowd was okay. I mean, we did okay. That was an okay crowd for us. It was not that dissimilar music. Kind of slightly 60s influence rock.
Were the Gallaghers fighting constantly?
Oh God! Well, yeah. The first show, there was some big brawl with the woman, some actress or model that Liam was going to marry, and he didn't show up for the first show. And Noel sang all the songs. So the first time I saw Oasis was just with Noel singing. And then we did a few. We were doing smaller arenas, 5,000 to 10,000 seat arenas. Had about, I think there were 10 shows scheduled, and we got down to North Carolina. And at that point, I don't know, Mark was having a lot of his own personal whatever problems, Flanagan. And that afternoon, we're in the dressing room. It's like, man, I just can't keep going. We got to cancel. So he talked to our tour manager, and he called the big managers, Q Prime guys, mentioned Bernstein. And they're like, okay, I know what you have to do it, whatever. It's probably an important tour. And we're supposed to do a Canadian tour right on the heels of this, which we ended up not doing. It was already scheduled. And then so an hour later, guess what? The tour is canceled because Noel and Liam are having a big fight after we talked. If we would have waited an hour, we would have just gone home anyway.
Damn it.
I was like, oh man, why didn't you wait? It was you can't finish the tour without Oasis. So yeah, the other band I was on the tour was the Manic Street Preachers. I didn't know much about, but later they actually were quite well known and critically acclaimed. I didn't watch them very much. I didn't really know anything about them at the time. So that was the Oasis tour, and then canceled I think that was only canceled the Canadian tour.
Then the very last tour that year we did was England, and we did one show in Germany, which is that Rock Palace. There's a lot of that on YouTube videos from it. And this was like that year also was when we got Josh home playing second guitar. That was cool. It was nice having a second guitar player. It really freed me up my playing. I was like, I played leads and stuff and like was playing better than I ever had before because I could actually play stuff. Like, I had to learn all the leads that I didn't play before. So that was neat. England, I had a blast in England. I don't know how great a condition Lanigan was at the time. It was just some of those shows from the 96, 97, 98, like you look at him, he just looks like a homeless guy off the street or something. And he's still singing pretty good, but just really eats you up doing substances like that. But
when do you think that transition went over though? You said, okay, I'm going to start doing this on my own.
What's that?
And I'm going to, you just making music on your own.
Yeah, well, basically what happened was just kind of everything just kind of like, well, we did that tour. I had a great time in England. I don't know, we got to drive around the car, saw the countryside.
That's cool.
The weather was great. It was kind of late, mid fall. And it was cool. And a lot of really nice shows, a lot of people there to see us. And we were supposed to play one show at a weird festival in a little town in France, but Mark canceled it. And I guess that was the last straw with the big managers, Q Prime. And they were like, forget about it. And I don't know if they did this out of spite, but they decided the next single was going to be Traveler. A weird idea for single. It's like no drums, really mellow, like 5-minute song. I like it a lot. It's one of my favorite songs we probably ever did. And Mark even played it solo, which is pretty amazing. He's played a few Scrimmage-based songs solo, but that was kind of like the nail in the coffin. As far as I was living in New York, Van was married.
You met your wife by then, and you were
we were married, and I lived in New York, and I decided to go back to college, and we did a West Coast tour in the middle of 97, spring of 97, played a couple of Showbox shows. They were really good shows. Talked about doing something. I actually went back to college and got my degree. I don't know why. I got an education. I got my education in history.
That's mine.
I ended up
that's
fun. I have a bachelor's in history and a master's in teaching.
But I did nothing. I got a paper. I delivered papers in the middle of the night for years. Yeah. And then spent about 10 years doing nothing and then started recording. Yeah, I have a college degree. My wife's like, great, you got a college degree. It's great. Because I majored in music in the early 80s when I was after high school, but I quit because I played trumpet and I hated playing trumpet. And I wanted to play guitar and be in a rock band. Yeah. I quit majoring in music and started a band. It took a few years, but we did shows and kind of did a smaller version of that in 98, played at Showbox shows, recorded some demos at, I guess it's a studio Stone Gossard owned. I don't know if he still does, called Litho Studios in Seattle. Had Peter Buck came out and played on one song, which is cool because Barrett knew him from playing with him. And then we did, I think we played 98 or I think it was 98. We played Bumper Shoot show at Memorial Stadium. And we were talking still, and I was giving songs to Mark, and we recorded some more songs at a friend of ours, Jupiter Studios, Martin Fevier. He was a road guy we met up with, and moved in England, and he moved to Seattle. He had a studio there, so we recorded some more songs there. And then, this whole time we tried to get off Epic, and Epic was like, okay, go. You owe us $1 million. We don't care, whatever. We'll get it someday. And we thought, well, we'll get a different label, But the late 90s was not a good time for alternate bands. It was just kind of like, they were trying to find the next big thing, and they couldn't. Right. Remember, like Prodigy was supposed to be the next big thing in like 96 or 97. And it was like, okay, this is the next big thing. No, not really, Yeah. And then the last stuff, we were in 2000, we went out to LA, played some shows at, I think, the Roxy, maybe the Viper Room, something like that. Right. And we recorded some more demos with Toby Wright. He was famous for something, and I don't know what. But for some reason, we had a bunch of songs, and we didn't even record any of the songs that we rehearsed. Instead, we wrote one song in the studio, that song Crawl Space, it's on Last Words, and did a weird version of another song, Anita Gray, which is on there. But anyway, all those songs, 3 different sets of what were time demos ended up coming out, I guess in 2011 on that Last Words record on the label Barrett started, Sunyata Records. That's what happened to all those songs. Eventually they came out. Took a few years, I don't know why we didn't just release ourselves at the time. I guess we were just kind of sick of it. But that's sort of what happened to the band. Instead of like saying like, fuck it, that's it. It was just sort of like petered out over a few years. Everyone was living all over the country. We weren't getting another label. Mark was doing solo stuff. I mean, the first time he played solo, he opened for Johnny Cash. 1995, like we went to it. It was July 1995. I think that was his first. It was Mike Johnson was still playing with him, and it was opening for Johnny Cash. We got to see Johnny Cash, and he wasn't in too bad. This was when he still was not completely dying. I mean, he was like, still in good voice, and it was pretty amazing. That was pretty cool. Mark's first show for Johnny Cash. So that's why then, like, we had that last show at that Experience Music Project. I didn't know it was our last show, but on the other hand, I wasn't surprised at all when I found out it was. It's like, that's why Mark didn't tell us anything. He doesn't even tell us it's our last show. Well, at least he didn't tell me. He didn't come up to me and say, this is our last show. I'm not going to play anymore. Yep. I heard after the show, like, what? It's our last show? Really? From somebody else. Before the show, Chris Novoselic was hanging out. Kind of like the old days, a few years before. That place was so weird. It was like I guess that's what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was. It's like a punk rock museum. And, they have like stuff. I don't know if they had any of our stuff in there at the time. There's actually a museum. They do have some of our stuff now. What's it called? Museum of something or other in Seattle. Somebody sent me, they got one of my speaker cabinets that I drew on, and one of my old guitars that Mark Lanigan pawned.
I've never heard of any such thing.
Yeah, it's a museum, and they got some rock music stuff in there. I'm not sure what it's called. I saw a picture of it I posted it on the Scream Shoes Facebook page. And it's really weird seeing your old stuff in a museum. But at the time, they had a bunch of Nirvana stuff, in the Experience Music Project Museum. And they have one of Chris's old basses. And he's like, I should go in there and break in and get my bass back.
That's mine. So that's going to be hard to see.
Yeah, he actually wanted to join. When Van quit the band in 1988, I got a call from Chris, and this was before Nirvana was really, and he wanted to play bass with us, but we already had Donna. And years later, we were at it wasn't the Nirvana show, it was somebody else's show. Maybe it was a Nirvana show. I don't know what show it was. Backstage, it was our show. We played at the Paramount, and Chris was back there again. He liked to hang backstage with us. And I'm like, hey man, this was like after, I don't know if Kurt was still alive, probably. I can't remember what year this was, but I think he was. But I was like, hey, it's a good thing that I didn't join the Screaming Trees back then. Because, you wouldn't be a millionaire. Right? Millionaire and former state senator, representative, and whatever, He was always really fun. I haven't seen him for years, but it was always cool to hang out with him and joke around. That was funny. So that's what happened to the Screaming Trees. And then Lanigan's solo career he had, around that time, after we did those shows in 98, he cleaned up some, been in rehabs and stuff. And he seemed like he was doing okay. I guess later, I know he had some problems in the later 2000s, the zeros, because I know Josh got upset with him because he was so messed up. But as far as I know, for years he's been clean, and he must be because he's so busy all the time. I mean, he just really keeps busy, and his voice is still, I really liked his new record's cool. I mean, a lot of it, I don't listen to everything he does, but I listen to stuff here and there, and because I'd have to spend all my time listening to music.
That dope is a tough thing to pull out of too, and I mean, just that the fact that he is still alive is a big testament.
Yeah, I saw something. Somebody. I didn't see. He was in a coma for 8 days or something. I never heard about that, but somebody was asking, like, what is this about a coma for 8 days? And I don't know where they got it, but
there's not a lot of really old junkies. William S. Burroughs maybe made it a while.
Well, what's weird, sometimes Mark's in it, but they have like all these grunge groups, and they show like pictures of all like Kurt and Lane and Andy Wood, and most of the time they include Eddie Vedder. And I always keep thinking, like, does Eddie Vedder see these sometimes? I think that is just weird, man. That is just fucking weird. All these people are dead, and every once in a while there'll be one with Lanigan too. I'm like, because he. We get mentioned in the same breath, half the time. I don't know. That's what's kind of weird. It's like all the bands they show like sold millions, or at least, a lot of records. We sold a lot for us. We weren't the biggest band in Seattle, but, I think people had a soft spot for us, like the Screaming Trees from the Northwest.
You're up there for us.
Yeah.
It was a unique sound. It's a very original sound.
I know.
And everything you did, we fucking loved. And you know, we're going to have to get you back on. We're going on time. We're going to have to get you back on and talk about your solo shit too.
Yeah, I know. It's like so much stuff. I mean, Scream of Trees was 15 years.
It's just a long time to talk about things, but you're going to have to come back on because, I mean, your solo shit too is just amazing. I love it. And it's like,
I mean, really in a nutshell, it's just, I love to write songs and I do it. And I finally got a computer that could write it good enough, sounding stuff to put it out on a record. So that's I
want to hear that process too.
And if you're interested in it, go to bandcamp.com. Gary Lee Conner.
Yeah. We'll make a couple episodes out of this one. This is
cool.
Great, man.
So let me say, thank you everybody for tuning in. You've been listening to
Gary Lee Conner.
Undetermined, the podcast.